All right, good evening, listeners. Welcome to Motley Crude, episode number 29. This evening with me, I've got Ryan. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. How are you, Kevin?
I'm doing great, thanks. And we've also got Andrew. How you doing?
Good.
Awesome. Good to hear. So this evening, we're going to be discussing the matched play guide that's been leaked and it's going to be releasing in the next few weeks here. We're going to be talking about, primarily the stuff that relates to single player events. We'll be touching a little bit on the two player and team events too, but we'll be focusing on what we play here most often. However, before we get to that point, let's talk a little bit about what's new in everybody's hobby. So Ryan, kicking it off with you, what have you been up to over the last, 4 days since we recorded?
Mostly working on the bathroom in my basement. But aside
Okay.
from that, I did build a kind of draft player pack based on the new matched play pack
Okay.
for Andrew and Danny to kind of do what they will with for their upcoming events.
Has it resulted in some pretty significant changes, or?
Not like I mean, the comp bit is debatable as to which way we go, but the comp we were using most recently is very similar to one of the ones we'll be discussing later.
Yeah.
And the missions are, different way to skin a cat, but also very similar to what Andrew, Danny, and I have already been they're on the same trend that we were on. They've just kind of found a different way to achieve the same effect. I don't want to go too much into what we're going to talk about later, but
Sure.
um,
Okay, awesome. And I'm probably no games played.
oh yeah, no, I've been busy.
Okay, that's good. Andrew, what about you? Still in painting some terrain, or?
Yeah. Just printing and painting and cutting bases with a laser cutter and making trees from scratch, which is the biggest pain in the dick ever. And I cleaned out my workspace because the other night I was carving up foam for hills
Okay,
and I may have had a few alcoholic beverages. So I got
sure.
real messy doing it, and I came in here the other day and my whole floor was covered in little penny-sized chunks of pink foam that was just stuck to every surface. I was like,
Nice.
wow, what the hell did I do? The hills look amazing though, so that's good.
That's good.
But yeah, I spent a good hour just vacuuming like every corner of this room, getting all this foams off of everything.
That reminds me of my hobby room right now. I have an obscene amount of plastic and resin shavings all over the place because I've been furiously building models over the last 3 or 4 days. I built like a dozen minotaurs and minotaur characters out of the orgroids from AOS. I converted a BSB in there, some leaders. Built a bunch of models for the Wolves of the Sea too, so like dragon ogres, a demon prince, a multitude of different varieties and stripes of marauders, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so my hobby room is also covered in shavings. I also did play a game since we recorded last time for the SBot 360 online. I played into a massive amount of Sisters of Averlorn, like a unit of 33 of them, I want to say. That's no longer going to be legal under the new comps that we're going to talk about this evening, like 30 plus sisters and then 3 mages in there and a handmaiden. So that was fun. It was a victory for the Chaos Dwarfs. My list is kind of set up to fight that kind of list, but nonetheless, everything that could have possibly gone wrong for me went wrong, and I kind of managed to claw it back on secondaries. Essentially, it was a tie, and then I won because of secondaries. So it was a good game. I've got another game in 2 days, and it's once again the famous mirror match, Chaos Dwarf on Chaos Dwarf. So that'll be Wednesday this week. Okay. in terms of news, there's been an Old World Almanac that came out this morning. It was about how Cathay plays on the tabletop, which is neither here nor there because the whole book is out at this point. However, there was a little bit of interest. There was a few interesting nuggets in that almanac. So just two things, and I want to hear what your guys' thoughts are on it. Is the first one. So there's no new models coming for Cathay as part of Wave 2. There's only, Miao Ying technically will be a newly released model, but her rules are already out. And then the battalion will be broken down into individual kits. And then the new Arcane Journal only has a single Army of Infamy in it. It's called the Jade Fleet, and allegedly it has access to a bunch of Empire units as mercenaries, tied to the lore there of Cathay sending an expeditionary force to the Old World, to the Empire specifically, as well as the AJ will be filled with narrative content like some scenarios, rules for occupying buildings, that kind of stuff. So, any thoughts on those news items, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm not super excited that there's not additional models, though. Like from like a businessy standpoint, I kind of get it. Um, but it's just one of those like for me personally, Cathay was like just missing a couple things that I wanted to be able to build an army with, and I
Mhm.
guess we're not going to see them for a while.
Yeah,
So that's not the greatest. The Army of Infamy with like Empire mercenaries and stuff, like unless it further reorganizes the incredibly limited, like literally like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic type problem, like there's only so many places the units in that army can be,
yeah,
and adding Empire stuff to the mercenaries slot still doesn't like let you reorganize much of it. Like the core is still just going to probably be Jade Warriors.
yeah.
Like,
It will.
so it's one of those things where like you could have just put the option for Empire mercenaries in the Grand Army and called it a day.
Yeah,
Um, and the rest of the content I don't really care about. Like, we're reviewing the book full of matched play missions. I'm sure there will be some neat things in the narrative missions, but narrative missions do also tend to be a little bit more screwbally and less useful in a like matched
yeah.
setting necessarily. So like there's a demographic of people that this is certainly of interest to. Um just not necessarily me.
Hmm.
And also just literally fuck occupiable buildings. It's not a thing I even have interest in introducing um to open gameplay with strangers.
Sure. Yeah. The thing also with those narrative missions is they tend to be a little bit more, I guess, constrained in their audience because they'll sort of shoehorn you into like this is this army versus that army under this very specific set of conditions that's like not really conducive, as you mentioned, to any type of organized play. So like the amount of people that actually get any benefit out of it is usually pretty limited. So I don't know. I'm not overly excited for this Arcane Journal either.
I do see this one being kind of like what was the Horus Heresy one that had like a bunch of missions and stuff in it?
Was it the Siege of Cathonia?
It was that or Beta Gammon. I don't remember. But
Okay. Yeah, well, I think they
yeah.
all have generally some
But
sort of narratives.
but
Yeah.
one of them had like a whole suite of missions in it that weren't as like restrained and thematic,
Okay.
but were still definitely meant for narrative play and not matched play. And that's the kind of feeling I'm getting off of this.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And God knows those across all those Horus Heresy supplements, you've got a ton of narrative esque missions to pick from for sure.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, Andrew, what are your thoughts on Cathay not getting anything else for the foreseeable future?
Did it say specifically nothing new or just not new model kits?
They said
Just didn't. Yeah, kits basically.
So maybe we might see new ways to run the same units but with different rules.
Sure.
Um, And also, like, potentially those Empire units aren't filling mercenary slots, but will just be interspersed into the actual like army build. So you
Yeah,
might
that would
see
be
like,
way
I don't
better.
know.
Yeah,
Right, but when I read that the almanac, that was my impression of it. Wasn't that they would be like the unit type mercenaries, but just the fact that there'll be Empire units in the list as quote unquote mercenaries, but will
sure.
be, you'd have like I want to call them freebooters, but it's not
Yes.
the shitty,
The militia. The militia.
yeah,
Yeah.
the militia, the guys who are definitely not pirates but super look like pirates. Like I figured
Yeah.
like they'd be like a new core choice or something for the list alongside like the Jade Lancers
Yeah.
and Spearmen. That's the way I read it, but maybe I'm
Certainly be an
wrong.
option.
Otherwise, like this is kind of how I expected AJ's to go going forward, where it's just gonna be like, here's a rando army list and a shit ton of new rules and scenarios. Because, unless they're gonna be adding another new army, like we're kind of at that point where it's like, where do they go from here with the AJs, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's not
Yeah.
like everyone's going to be adding a new faction to the game. We know Tilia might be coming, but it's not 100% guaranteed. And there's another couple rumors out there of possible future armies, but realistically, they're probably going to keep releasing AJ. So it's my guess is going to start looking a lot like this, where it's like, here's just a weird army list and a bunch of new scenarios, and maybe we might see one with like siege rules or
Mhm.
I don't know, whatever. This one's introducing like occupiable buildings. So I think as we go, this is how our AJs are going to start looking from now on.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Like I totally did not have that take on the arcane journals. I thought they were go down the because of some of the stuff they hinted at in the past. I thought they were going to go down the road of like this is this battle X that happens in I don't know somewhere in the Border Princes, and these are the two armies that fought there, and like they both get their army of infamy type situation, rather than like here's just rules for sieges or how to make a map
Well,
campaign. Yeah.
I mean, both of
I
those
think it,
things would go in the same thing.
Sure.
yeah, that's the way I would see it too. Like it'd be like, okay, let's talk about XYZ battle, which was like a big, siege of a fucking castle. These were the two armies that were taking part in it, but then you can take these rules out and make your own scenarios or, mix and match whatever factions are taking part. But in effect, it's adding siege rules to the game, right?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, but yeah, you guys are right. Both can be in there at the same time for sure. Um, yeah, and then on the Cathay side, like I'm so at least if you're a Cathay player right now and you're a bit pissed off that the second wave's not bringing anything new, like we've been mentioning here for a few months now that what we heard is that Cathay was coming in 3 waves. We assumed that the second wave had models, but at least you can hold out hope a little bit there for that third wave in 2026, potentially having some models with it. Hopefully, anyways. And in the almanac today, they did mention a few times like should the range expand in the future, and when the range expands and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think the door is completely closed for Cathay. It would be a pretty half-assed army if it stopped there. Okay. So let's talk about something a little bit more positive now. The match play guide. So let's kick off here with Ryan. What are your overall thoughts about the match play guide? Do you think this is what the event scene and the game in general needed? And do you think the book is a hit or a miss from your end?
Yeah, so overall, I actually really like this as a product. And as a person who's been running events across 6 different game systems for the last 16 years, if I did my math correctly. No, more than that. Almost 20 years?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, anyway, run a lot of events, but like this is the book that I wish existed when I was 16. Um like it's it kind of yes, it has its like weird Warhammer isms where it just like takes a good idea and then takes a weird left turn for no reason.
Sure.
But like to a new person who's never run an event before and maybe has never even been to an event before or has only been to a limited number of events, and going to an event doesn't actually mean you know how an event is run on the back end. um,
Yeah.
this is a great starting point for people to work off of, um, especially as they're growing the hobby and doing all those other things. And also, it provides the wider community with a like common language with which to talk about certain subjects. Now, arguably, the rule book also did that, and in less than a year, we had 7 different overlapping tournament systems that seem to exist.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and honestly, this doesn't seem to be actually solving that because elements of those things are very highly entrenched, and just kind of cherry picking what parts of this book they do and do not want to include in their systems. But that's kind of here nor there. I
And
think
that was always
overall,
going to happen. Yeah.
yes and no. Like other GW game systems have been you know really good at widely
Fair.
adopting.
Mhm.
Um, but this game system in particular, I think, was just left to its own devices for so long,
Yeah.
that you just have a lot of entrenched. This is what Warhammer looks like, air quotes,
Yep.
um, that people are pushing for. But overall, like I think the book's a hit. I think it does its purpose. I think it's good for the scene overall, and I actually really do think, if anything, adoption of the missions um, will be beneficial for the community at large. But I'll get to that when we get to them.
Awesome. Andrew, are you as positive as Ryan is on this book?
Um, I think I'm in the middle.
Okay.
Like I like overall, I like the book. I like everything that's in it. Um, like Ryan pointed out, there is some weird like left turns when you're like, oh, this is really cool, and then you read the next line, it's like, oh, that's a weird addition to that really cool. Um, but overall, yeah, I think this is really good. It's really good for people who maybe aren't super engaged with the competitive side of things to see, what an event kind of looks like if you've never been to them before. I appreciate that.
Sure.
As a TO, I'm going into this book with my own preformed conceptions of how a tournament should be, so maybe that sullies some of my thoughts on some of the decisions in here, but at the same time I can appreciate what's there. My only real gripe is it feels a little light for something that's a $30 book coming out. This feels
Sure.
a lot like it could have been sort of a PDF release. Um, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there's a lot of useful and good things in here that I hope sort of reshapes the tournament scene a bit so that we're all kind of back on the same page instead of, all these weird groups in the States with their own sort of version of Warhammer fantasy right now that is
Yeah.
vastly different than what it seems like a lot of the rest of the areas are doing.
Mhm.
Hopefully it brings some of that back in line so we do have a more common language and an easier time sort of being able to travel between the different regions if we want to play games and people have, they know what to expect wherever they go. But I guess time will tell if that's the case or not.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to see how widely and thoroughly this is adopted. Sorry. Yeah. From my perspective, I'm super happy with the book. I think it's a hit. There's a lot of stuff I like in here. I really like having a system of standardized comp across the event community worldwide. Hopefully, like I have some opinions about how good or not that comp is, but in general, I'm very happy. I like the missions. I think as Ryan said, bringing everybody back onto the same missions with I think the option of doing some variety even within the same mission by just changing the secondaries, which really alters how that mission plays. I think will give the system some longevity. It will give it some legs that it probably didn't have before. I think the secondaries are great. I think even the secret objectives are fun as as a little side thing you can do. So yeah, overall I'm happy, very happy. There's like a few small quibbles that I have that we'll get to, but like generally speaking, this is solid, a solid hit from my perspective. Like I don't know, an 8 out of 10 or something. I'm very happy with it. Okay, so just the next thing. So a little bit more from the tournament organizer perspective. Like what kind? So I'm going to start with Andrew here. What part of the community do you think needed a book like this? Is it like for everybody, or do you think there's a little bit more of a niche market? Do you think this makes things easier from like the perspective of running better single player events, or maybe coordinating between events, that kind of stuff? Do you think it gets doubles events up and running, or even promotes like team based stuff, like all that kind of from a TO perspective?
Um, I think it does. I don't know. It's hard because, like, I guess as someone who runs TOs, I might have less. I see less value in a book like this because I already run events. I kind of know a lot of the things covered in this book that it lays out.
Yeah.
Um, but that doesn't change the fact that this is basically like a how to run tournaments for dummies book, which is amazing because I'm sure there's people out there who would like to, organize events more, but maybe just don't know how to do it. And if you go to place like Reddit or Facebook groups and be like, how do you run an event? Like you're gonna have a million different people giving their own version of how you should do that.
Yeah.
So this is a good way to sort of use your handbook on how to do that. Um Realistically, I don't know if it's gonna jumpstart like doubles events more than like the demand has to be out there for it, and I'm not sure if that's there. Maybe it is. We've never actually done that in our area. Um, but I don't think just because they put out rules for it, it's going to like all of a sudden we're going to see this huge influx of doubles events going on. Like I think someone has to actually, put it out there and run those types of events. I know they do take place in some areas, but I don't think
Yeah.
they're super popular. I think what we're probably going to see more of is like team-based events,
Sure. Yeah.
4, 5, 8 player teams. I think that's going to be sort of the next tournament style frontier. But if you're not really a super competitive player, or if you just rather play like sort of beer and pretzels hammer, or you're more into the narrative stuff, I think there's less value here for some people, and maybe they this would be a pass for those players. But
Sure.
overall, I think like this is a generally positive thing.
Yeah, but I
I don't
think
know if I
even
answered
if
your
you're like
question properly.
no, you've given us like a lot to sort of think about for sure. But I think just to jump on your last comment, even if you're playing at home with like 2 or 3 people like on the regular and you don't like engage with the broader community, I'd say that there's often a case where there's a person out of the lot who brings something that often wins games, and at least the comp will sort of rein that a little bit in and sort of put everybody on a more even playing field, especially with some of the other stuff that we're expecting, like an FAQ and stuff like that. But no, that was super interesting. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think this is something really any play group could have on their shelf to at least reference whether they're running tournaments or not. And I already talked about the hypothetical, young tournament organizer that just needs a nice handbook on how to do it.
Sure.
So that's all great. I will say, like, again, some of the weird left turns Games Workshop threw in here, like, it is not recommended in my experience to actually run a tournament word for word how this book tells you to do it. It creates a lot of bookkeeping and just has some overall strange choices, but
Yeah.
the base that it's all built on is great. Um, and the nice thing is everything is generally phrased as a recommendation, which means I don't feel nearly as bad, like cherry picking bits and pieces out of it to add to something else,
Yeah.
as opposed to it being a like, this is a format where you must do A, B, C, and D so that all of it makes sense together. Um, as to doubles, I mean, yeah, like it's got an explanation of how to do them. I don't know if it's necessarily easier to do or more interesting. I do think having a bit of commonality on how to do teams will be nice.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's all I really think.
Awesome. Yeah, so I generally agree with you guys. I don't think there's like I'm not a TO, but like my feeling is probably that there's not as many TOs, like prospective TOs out there who wouldn't know where to start, who are going to benefit from this. I see the appeal. Maybe they are, and if this is what they need, then fantastic. I'm all there for it. I think the appeal is much broader though. Like even if you are sort of the quote unquote like casual, as as far as a person could be casual and engage with this hobby, which is another discussion. But if you're sort of on that side of the house, like and you play more than a few times a year where you start to like feel like things are getting samey, just the comp, the new missions, the secondaries are super fun, and they're not like these gamey secondaries that you see in other game systems. Like they have a pretty massive narrative spin to a lot of them too, so like they'll be fun to integrate into your home games. Secret objectives, I think you can have a blast with when you like pull something off on your buddy and then just bring out the card after and be like, hey, this was my secret thing I was trying to do all game. Like I think the appeal is actually pretty broad on this. So yeah, I think I like it. I think it'll help a lot of players out there just spice up their game, as it were. Cool. And then just before we move on, Ryan, what's your number one favorite thing in the whole book?
The missions themselves.
Okay, that's a good pick. I'm gonna say the comp. What about you, Andrew?
Uh, it's gonna sound weird, but I really like the 6-0 system,
Okay,
the
yeah, that's
differential
a
they introduced.
yeah, that's a good one, and a perfect segue because that's the next subject we're going to cover. We've heard you, Andrew, but I'll go right back to you here in a second. Like, what do you think of the overall 6-0 system that's been proposed by GW? Like, do you think this is better than the kind of differential system that we've been using, or like the 20-0 system, or maybe even like the major minor victory system that was in the base rulebook? Like, what are your just developing those thoughts on the 6-0?
Yeah, so for the longest time, even up to like before I got my hands on this book, I was super 20-0 differential. I thought that was the like number one best way to do things. But then running that event at the beginning of the month or end of last month, whatever. Um, the one that Danny or Ryan had set up and then unfortunately had to step away from. He was using the win loss or the major win, minor win,
Yeah.
that one. I thought that was a lot easier for a 1 day or even a 2 day singles event. And I think it was Ryan or someone in one of our group chats had said, 20-0 is good, and this is paraphrasing, but like 20-0 is good, but it's only really good if you have like either a teams event or um like an event with like 100 people, right? Where you need that super like granular, like, okay, here's how much you won by on a 20-0 scale. And that got me thinking, like, it's like, you're right, like a 20-0 system on a 1 day, 20 person tournament kind of overkill for what you need to
Sure.
determine a winner for that type of event. So when I saw this, I'm like, well, this is like a really good, in between of um it's a really good like in between system. Like it has aspects of the 20-0, but it's on a 0 to 6 scale. And it still has that sort of like big win, small win, um, and relevant losses. So it's like a good mix of that and just kind of like simples it down for, smaller events or, 1 day events. I still think like, if you are doing a teams event, maybe 20 is a lot better. But I really like this system. It seems really elegant. It's really simple. Um, I'm sure we'll talk about the brackets later, but I think the
Yep.
brackets are just right when you're looking at the missions also introduced in this book, as well as like the secondaries um, that are in those missions. Like I think this is a well thought out part of the book, and that's why it's kind of my favorite thing because it's like I'm definitely going to be using this in my events going forward because it's just nice and simple. It's great.
Awesome. Good. Ryan, what is your thoughts on the 6.0 system?
So I'm also a big fan of this. It's very, very similar to a system that was devised in Flames of War that we used for tournaments. That was effectively what Andrew was getting at. It was a bridge system between 20-0 differential and win-loss draw that, you know, still gives you a reason to fight for points, but doesn't also like completely count you out of the event if you get a draw or a minor victory early on. So yeah, I like that. But Andrew really covered the vast majority of the exact same things I was going to say about this.
Well, half the reason I like it is because of the things you've said to me. So
That's fair.
Sure. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So on my end, a bit like Andrew, I kind of needed some convincing when I saw that they were changing or that they were going to give us something to go with that wasn't the 20-0 system. Just because I'm super familiar with that, I like it a lot because of its granularity. That being said, like I'm actually super happy with the result. I think 6.0 will work very well. I personally was not a fan of like the minor major win system that was like in the base rulebook. It felt like as a player, it felt super binary to me of like basically just boiled down to a win or a loss, like at CTC, which is obviously the last big event I went to. I finished 4-1, but like they were radically different games, but they all sort of boiled down to win loss. If I'm sort of looking at the score there. And I kind of find that if you're in that kind of system, there's no point in, doing your best to play well or trying to preserve points or whatever when you're losing. It's just like, well, this is one loss. I may as well go for broke every time, which is, fine for some people, but I'm not necessarily a fan of. Yeah, so all that to say, I think the 6.0 system will work super well. And I like that, Ryan. I think the way you described it as a bridge between both is I think is a pretty fair assessment there. And yeah, so I'm also a fan of that little bit. And the next point is just you touched on it briefly, Andrew. So I'll start with Ryan this time. What are your thoughts, Ryan, on the differentials, the splits that have been proposed by GW? So in particular, the one I found the most interesting, the 0 to 300 being points difference being a tie, and then just at the end there, if you got any thoughts on the proposed tiebreakers.
Yeah, so I actually don't mind the differential brackets. So just for those listening, at 2,000 points, it's 0 to 300's a draw. 301 to 750 is a minor victory. 751 to 1400's like a moderate victory, and then everything above that's a crushing victory. Um, I'm good with those, especially when you look at the sheer amount of extra points that are available using the missions and the secondaries. I think winning by 300 points indicates that, you killed some enemy and did some secondary activity, or you killed more enemy at least. Um, Like it means you really need to commit in order to win, which I am a fan of. The proposed tiebreakers can just like get fucked. Like the
Yo,
first one, total victory points, sure, that is a decent and nicely definitive tiebreaker. The only downside to it is that since there's a variable number of victory points available in every game
Sure.
based
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the mission and who you're playing, it can create a situation where like you and another player that both have a bunch of like 6-0 wins, you can never catch up to them because
Yeah.
they got a 6-0 with like,
An army that had
3,000
8
victory
banners.
points.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then like VPs from secondary objectives, that's just a nightmare to track. And number of enemy generals slain is kind of who cares. Um,
Yeah.
like if like, and I know like they definitely were not going to go into something like strength of schedule, but like if I had an event that was over 100 players and didn't have enough rounds and everything, I would just go tournament points, which is the 6-0 system, followed by strength of schedule, followed by victory points, and you'd have a guaranteed winner based on
Yeah.
that.
Fair. Yeah. That makes sense. Andrew, what are anything you want to also toss in there in terms of differential and tiebreakers?
um, no, I think I've already talked about the differential a bit. Basically, I'm happy with the system. I agree the tiebreakers are not the best. But I think they're still serviceable for like smaller 1 day events, especially if you're not used to running events yourself.
Sure.
That's also not taking into account that things like BCP exist, which you can set up strength of schedule tracking very easily, and you don't actually have to do anything with it. It's all done automatically on the back end of the program.
Yeah.
I know there's other programs out there, but BCP is the one I'm most familiar with. So it's very easy to sort of make better tiebreakers in that program and just have it do that. So I kind of agree with Ryan that there could be better ways to do it, but for a document like this from GW, I think this is fine and serviceable.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I was listening to you, Ryan, there, and I hadn't even considered like the challenge of just getting all your players to correctly, write down their VPs for secondary objectives throughout a tournament, and then expect to have a reliable figure at the end, which you can use to sort of tie break. I'm really not convinced about that one. But like parking those differentials aside for a sec, because I think we all agree that they're, you could probably do better on your own if you thought of something. That I find the differentials to be quite interesting. Like specifically the 0 to 300 as a tie, I find to be a bit of a widespread. But I'm willing to roll with it. And you guys are right that like a lot of new methods of scoring points have been introduced through this book, so they're probably not all that common either. And it'll be interesting to see then with all those new points being introduced, how that skews where sort of people land in terms of minor, decisive, and crushing victories. Because if I was going to, think of how we used to play the game until this book, well, it hasn't even come out really, but until this book was sort of previewed, I think most of the victories in the game would land in the minor victory and then on the lower scale of decisive victory. So it'll be interesting to see with all the points for secondaries being thrown in and stuff, if we actually get more crushing victories than we did before, or probably a lot more decisive victories actually. So I'm excited to see how that shakes out for sure. Okay, let's get to the most interesting part, at least for me here, army composition stuff. So I'll start with Ryan. Can you give us we're going to skip the first set of army comp because open war is basically exactly what's in the Big Blue rule book. So we're just going to skip that one. Ryan, you want to go through what's in Grand melee, and then and grand melee, and then what's that comp?
So Grand Melee is the comp where you may not spend more than 25% of your army's total points value on a single character or unit. So 500 points in a 2,000 point game. Your army can include any number of level 1 or 2 wizards, but can only include 0 to 1 level 3 per 1,000 and 0 to 1 level 4 per 2,000. With a note that these limitations do not apply to named characters, and that under Grand Melee, you can still take mercenaries, and allies are at the TO's discretion. So this one kind of goes after your Chaos Dragon Lord, your weird giant Death Stars, your level 4 wizard spam. But it doesn't, kind of in a weird space, and I'll kind of talk about all of it when we get through both comps, but I've done the math before, and 500 points only really restricts the Chaos Lord and maybe takes the edge off of the High Elf Dragon Lord and impacts nothing else. And 25% of your army's total points in one unit, again, takes the edge off some of the here is my, brick of unkillableness. But you can still have a shit ton of poison night goblin shooting for under 250 points. And I personally have never run into spammed level 4 wizards. So anyway, I find that this is solving a problem that maybe the internet believes is a problem, but
Sure.
I don't see for example, Bretonian exiles and even mortuary cults aren't changing anything based on this comp.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
Interesting. Yeah, that's I think so. I generally agree with you. So I guess my take on the grand melee here is that I don't like this comp on its own. I think with we'll talk about that in a second here, but I think combined with the other comp, it's workable. But I think if you play this one on its own, you end up penalizing a few armies, like a few factions, and then a few army lists, but you don't really sort out the broader systemic issues with the game system. Unfortunately, especially as it relates to competitive play. So with this with this comp pack, basically, you've got a few armies that suffer, like your Warriors of Chaos suffer from it. You've mentioned the dragon issue, Ryan, because they've got the only dragon that's consistently above 500 points, so it basically renders him non-viable at that point. High elves sometimes have a dragon over 500 points, often just above 500 there, which is also going to be affected. Your lists that have the quote-unquote ridiculous Death Stars, like your 1,000 Sisters of Averlorn or your Royal Host with 1,000,000 Skeleton Archers, are pretty heavily affected by this. Armies that have multiple casters, which are probably the ones that don't need to be brought back into, generally speaking, into compliance, let's say. So, your Orcs and Goblin poison shooting block that usually is supported by 2 or 3 casters takes a bit of a hit on this one. The Empire, which basically has nothing going for it, and often you'll see more than one caster gets hit. Mortuary cults, you do sometimes see the 2 level 4 casters on dragons, or sometimes one on foot, one on dragon type situation. So that will, and I'm not too upset to see them get hit, but it'll affect them a little bit. Beastmen often have multiple. It's an army it's probably the army that most often has multiple casters. They're partially exempt now because Kralma is a named character who doesn't get hit by the restriction, but nonetheless, it will touch them in some way, shape, or form, because you did see multiple Great Bray Shamans. So yeah, I don't like this on its own, because I think it penalizes a few lists and factions without necessarily hitting the biggest offenders. There's nothing, as you mentioned, Ryan, that affects Bretonia in any way, shape, or form here. Tomb Kings is very partially affected. Probably the most out of the sort of the big hitters, aside from Warriors of Chaos, but still, Vampire Counts is definitely not affected by this. So yeah, I'm not super happy on its own. Andrew, what are your thoughts on this comp system?
Yeah, I think you guys covered the most of it. Like, I see what they're trying to do, but it doesn't really do anything to the worst offenders. Um, it, it's I don't know how they could have done it much better though, without individually going into armies and being like, okay, you can only have this many fucking Sisters of Avalorn. You can't
Sure.
have all these same upgrades on the Chaos Dragon. You can't have X, Y, like so on and so forth. So I guess it's okay as a generic comp without going super deep, but it doesn't really do much to change things, I find.
Yeah.
I don't even know like how many actual Death Stars that take up 25% of your army are fooling around out there. Like it hits maybe one or two things, but then the real
Two, I
bad
think.
ones
Yeah.
are still kind of fine.
Yeah, the only sort of semi-common one that gets hit really hard is the Royal Host. Like the 120 archers and attendant pieces is usually significantly over 500, but that's the only one that gets massively hit. You're right.
But even then, like, is that game breaking?
Uh, well, I think people thought it was at first, but have sort of learned to play with it. But yeah,
So
That's that's the key to all of these reactive comps so far.
yeah, of course. Yeah, you guys are right. Yeah, sorry, were you done there, Andrew? Or
yeah, like I don't. I
Yeah.
don't know. It
it's
seems like a
not
nothing.
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it affects so few things, it doesn't feel like much. Maybe the 0 to 1 level 4s will impact things a little bit more. We'll have to see.
Well, it hurts
Um,
Empire,
yeah,
like you said, which is
yeah,
like okay. The one thing they had like super good going for them, other than their cannons, is
yeah.
that they could actually fit in a bunch of level fours and have like a decent, caster wall spammy list. But now even that's hit, so it's just like cool. Keep pushing them down. Keep fucking with the Empire.
I'm fine with that. That's all right. Okay, so let's look at the second one. Combined arms. So combined arms basically follows the restrictions that are in the core rulebook. However, it brings additional restrictions on types of it gives you limits on types of units that are not otherwise limited in your base army list or in your Army of Infamy army composition list. So essentially, what it does is it says unless there's an other restriction that exists, you can only have 0 to 3 of each character. You can only have 0 to 4 of each core model. Or core unit, sorry. You can have 0 to 3 of each special unit, and you can only have 0 to 2 of each rare / mercenary unit. Yeah, and that's basically it. Those limits change a little bit. If you for every 1,000 points over 2,000, you can take an additional one of each. But I mean that's pretty marginal impact. So yeah, overall, I like this one more than the Grand Melee. If you're just going to do one of the two, I guess I'm team combined arms. I think I prefer both together, but so combined arms is good because I think it's a straight improvement over the the blanket rule of 3 that everybody's been going with. There's no reason that I don't know, for instance, I've talked about this in the past, but your 45 points Hobgoblin bolt throwers should be limited to 3 instead of 4 or what have you. There's no reason that a person who wants to take 4 units of Chaos Warhounds couldn't. So I think this is good. It limits some of the annoying bits and the worst offenders in terms of just having not worst offenders at from an optimized competitive play perspective, but from an unfun play experience perspective. I think if you're an army that has good core units, this is already a benefit for you, being able to take 4 over 3 of that good core you could have in there. So if you're, I don't know, playing Wood Elves, you're probably going to see more Deepwood Scouts and core, for instance, or Wolves of the Sea has some fun core options. You'll see more of those in there, etc. Right, like Skinks, what have you. Like any army that has a good core. Razor Gores, each Beastman list will have 4 Razor Gores now instead of 3. That kind of stuff, right? I think on the rare and mercenary side, this is also pretty good. I don't think rare was too much of an issue, but like you'll no longer be seeing a ton of Doom Seekers, for instance, that'll restrict their numbers a little bit because I think they look kind of strange when you have a ton on the
Doom
board there.
Seekers are already otherwise limited.
Oh, sure, fair enough. But so overall, I think this is this is good. I like it. I think if you're going to take one of the two, take Combined Arms from my for my 2 cents is worth. But I don't know how you guys feel, Andrew. I think you're muted, man.
No, I'm just thinking.
Okay.
I'm still struggling to see what this actually changes, other than places that use strict like rule of 3. Sure, you get a couple more core units if you want, but realistically, like how many of 3 of the same character are you ever seeing consistently?
Yeah.
So like looking at like my Dark Elf list or even the Beastman list I'm working on, like that, nothing changes in those lists. Plugging them into this, and I'm having a hard time thinking of other lists where that would also be the case. Like I think people already run a fairly diverse mix of units from their army lists to begin with, especially in like more optimized lists. It's more combined arms centric anyway. So like what realistically changes there? But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just don't know the meta well enough.
Yeah, so
But like
I think it's not that big
even
of a yeah, go ahead.
like even okay, like take your go-to standard Chaos Dwarf list. If you plug it into Combined Arms, does anything change at all? Do you have to drop any of your choices in that list?
I do not, but I'm up against the limit in a number of categories.
Okay, so you might be able to get one extra thing if it's like your core that you're at
Sure.
your limit.
No, it's
But that's
in characters, yeah. But
okay.
yeah.
But realistically, you wouldn't change your list if you could add more characters, right?
No, I wouldn't.
So
Because there's
that's
not
kind of
enough
my
points.
point.
It's a points issue for me.
Like Ryan, are you in the same boat with your Bretonian Exile list? Would you change anything if it went to Combined Arms?
I don't have
Drop it
more
over.
than 2 copies of anything in that army.
Yeah. So
Right, but that's kind of my point. Is like, what does this actually change for most people?
So I think for most people it doesn't change much. It's more like it'll change. So I don't think the worst offenders are like the people who are not the worst offenders are not super like don't have to change their list much out of this. However, like there's stuff that'll be brought like if especially if you combine the two of them together. If you're for instance the last list I played had 2 level 4s in it, right? Like now that it has to drop one, where do those points go? And then when you add the limits, if you were to combine both in terms of combined arms, like both of those together, I think will change the list construct a little bit, potentially. But I think I saw it a little bit more as from a positive perspective of being able to take more, for instance, like I go back to core units there because there's a bunch of good, well, not a bunch, but there are some good core units that are artificially limited right now, that I'm sure those armies will be happy to take more of. So
Sure.
yeah, it's not massive. It's not massive. Yeah. Ryan, did you have anything else to on this one on combined arms?
Yeah, so I'm kind of still in the same boat as Andrew on this front though, where like given that we weren't necessarily using strict rule of 3 here in Ottawa,
Yeah, we weren't.
like well, okay, like just for those listening, like our version of rule of 3 was exactly this. It just said 0 to 3 in every line It was, unless otherwise limited, everything was restricted to 0 to 3. So, like, from the last version of the comp I wrote here to this, you lose 1 rare and gain 1 core. But again, like, aside from some, like, real, like, MSUE builds or whatever, you're not gaining anything. And even to, like, your Wood Elf example, it's only 1 per 1,000 Deepwood Scouts in core.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
So you're not gaining any Deepwood Scouts in this comp, as an example. So it's one of those, like, the only thing I think it really exists to rein in is something like the hypothetical, like, it's a quality of life control for things like the 14 tombs or the 13 tomb scorpion army that won't win the event but is just unfun for everyone, including the person playing it.
Sure.
But at the same time, like, this, like, to use another example of an absurd army that people did not enjoy playing into, this does absolutely nothing to prevent the gyrocopter armies that we saw at CHTC.
Yeah, because
Like,
they're in units, they're in multiples. Yeah.
exactly. Like, so this comp doesn't prevent that army from existing. It doesn't. So, like, I'm just hard pressed to find the unit entry that's getting spammed to more than 3 applications in some slots, or the rare entry that isn't already 0 to 1 per 1,000 or otherwise limited. So, like, you'll get people that at first glance read this and go, oh, you can only have 2 Hellblaster volley guns. But a Nuln army is 0 to 2 per 1,000. So you can still have 4
Yeah.
even in this comp, right? So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where, like, it's almost like a placebo. Like, you put it in there so the players can feel good about it more so than it actually fixes something. Now, I do agree with you. I personally, and I was going to save this for a later comment, but I personally think the only way to use these comps is to use both of them or none.
Mm-hmm.
But I was going to get into that later.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that later, I guess. So, Andrew, coming back to your point, now that I've had a little bit more time to think about it, I think it's you. I think it was Ryan, but you're totally right in that because we haven't been using a strict rule of 3 here in Ottawa. This doesn't necessarily feel like that big of a change, but I do know that, like, elsewhere in the world, a strict rule of 3 is kind of, anyways, more common than it is here, and this, I think, affects this. And like it affects those places, and it opens up list variety for them. And I think crucially, it gives some of the, like, lesser performing armies a bit more of a leg up. Like, I'm sure your Lizardman player, your local Lizardman player, will be happy to be able to take an extra unit of skinks in his army, and it's totally not going to break your local meta, but give him a slight bit more of a fighting chance, let's say. And then you're going to see stuff like, I'm sure there's Bretonian players will be happy to take a 4th unit of Peasant Bowmen over some more crappy Knights of the Realm or whatever. You're always going to see 4 Razorgors, as I mentioned earlier. Like, armies, I think, that rely on war machines or that have the option to rely on war machines are also going to benefit from this. So, the poor Empire may have lost some wizards, but being able to take 4 or 5 or 6 cannons or what have you probably gives them a little bit more of a fighting chance and lets them play as they were intended to be played a little bit more. Dwarves are kind of in the same boat on that one. So yeah, not massive, but I think in other places, Andrew, it's probably a little bit more significant than for us. Okay. So let's assume for 1 second here that people are going to play both these packs together. That's what I've also heard from other sort of content creators that have been discussing this. So if you were to play both of these together, how do you think? I'll start with Andrew. Like, who gets penalized or who gets pumped up or buffed up as a result of these comp changes?
If we play it as a combined comp.
Yeah.
no change.
No change, you think? Okay.
Like you combine it together, it's still both the things we've highlighted in both comps, where it's like, oh, this isn't a huge problem. Still is the same, and the
Okay.
things that lose out, like the Empire, uh, wizard spam list, you can still only take your one level 4, so you're still penalizing the have-not army to begin with, and even the dwarf like Doomslayer spam list. I guess it wouldn't affect that.
No.
So, like, I think it's better, I guess, to have it all together, because then you have like this cohesive comp system that kind of tags a lot of different things, but I still don't see it actually doing anything to hurt those, the highlighted like super powerful lists, like the Bretonian Exiles and the Mortuary Cults. Like they're still gonna operate just fine inside the combined comp here. And I think that's kind of where we're just going to be at regardless, unless we start looking at individual comping of actual factions as opposed to it like overall general comp, because you're never going to be able to hit everything evenly in sort of a comp system like this. And personally, I would rather just stay in a comp system like this than do like the old school WTC. Like, here's how you play. Here's how we're gonna hit every single army or buff every single army. Like, I hated that shit back in the day.
Yeah.
So I think this is fine, but it still doesn't really do much to knock those super, the S tier lists down a peg. Like, they're still going to be fine. They're still going to be able to operate basically unchanged, other than the few lists that were running double level 4s. But I'm sure they'll make do with a level 4 and a level 3,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Like, it might be a minor change, but it won't be like huge and game changing for those lists, and they'll still be operating at basically 100%.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Ryan, what are your thoughts on who gets hit by this, or do you think it's also a bit of a nothing burger?
So I'm going to caveat my answer here a bit that like obviously the perspective I can give is only relevant to like the rules as they exist pre FAQ.
Yeah.
Because some of the rumored FAQ changes, like I'll use the example of the like the level of wizardry thing. Like if level 3s and level 4s have the same casting bonus,
Yeah.
then only being
No
able to take
change. Yeah.
three master mages, but or wizard lords, sorry, um, but having like one level 4 and two level 3s, and they all cast at the same value, is a hugely different prospect than one level 4 and two level 3s in the like current rules paradigm.
Yeah.
Um, so just caveat emptor. With that said, and I guess I also need to look at this. So in the universe of like straight rule of 3, this does do a little bit to help Empire and dwarves and things like that, where they can just get more war machines in,
Mhm.
while also like taking the edge off of like Chaos Lord on Dragon, a
Yeah.
little bit of High Elf, things like that. But I don't think even combined, um, that these in and of themselves do enough to like unseat Brett Exiles, Mortuary Cult. Um,
Vampire
this
counts.
does do a lot to take the wind out of the sails of the like extreme cutting edge High Elf army. Because you kind of screw over both the Dragon and the Giant Sisters of Avalorn unit.
Yeah.
Um, but like that army can still work with fewer Sisters of Avalorn and a less great dragon. Like it still works. Um, So, and like none of this does anything to vampire counts at all. So those kinds of things, like I don't think that these in and of themselves like do like a revolutionary change to the metagame, but I do think they kind of smooth some of the weird edges.
Mhm.
But I also think in terms of like player quality of life, if anyone remembers like 40K Ard Boys back in the day, like I feel like we may wander into a world where we have kind of two parallel competitive versions of the game, and one
Sure.
is the like open war, like no holds barred, play the game straight out of the book version, and the other one will be the grand combined melee arms um, version
Yeah.
where it's mostly just there to like tone it down a little bit and signal to those, you know, the competitive casuals or the like, those people that are going to go to the event and maybe, go 3-2 or 2-3 and they play in tournaments or whatever, but it's like signal to them that like they can go and like, you know, they know what the floor is, as
Yeah.
opposed to, showing up and like having some like complete bizarro world army dropped on them where literally someone just had enough money and a 3D printer to make it reality.
Sure.
That's all.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I think I'm right there with you when you started your comment about the FAQ. I think these two comps together or alone on their own is like they're not enough for my tastes in terms of fixing the game. But you guys are correct in that this is all there's like a sort of trifecta of things that are coming in all at once to sort of upset the balance right now. Like this comp is a part of it, and this like the comp and the missions and everything that's in this book is a part of it. The second part of it is the FAQ errata that's coming out. Third part of it is Cathay and all those new armies that were introduced or reintroduced recently through their arcane journals. So I think all of that together, and not just these comps alone, is going to really shift things and change things in a more meaningful manner. However, thinking about these comps, I think there's two armies that get hit by the comp changes especially hard, and then I think there's like three of them that are sort of hit in a more marginal manner. So first of all, I think Warriors of Chaos are like the big loser out of this. Warriors of Chaos and Orcs and Goblins are the two factions that I think get hit the hardest. So Warriors of Chaos, that dragon was such a staple of their lists, and such an effective piece in competitive play. That thing is, I think, essentially non-viable now because of the 500 point limit. So that'll force some major changes and rethinking in terms of list building for the Warriors of Chaos players. And then Orcs and Goblins, I think, are also hit, and maybe even a little bit harder because their bench is not as deep as Warriors of Chaos. But like that poison shooting block of Night Goblins was a staple of competitive lists, or like optimized competitive lists, let's say. And that one is very hard to run as effectively when you can't have multiple level 4s doing all the buffing and the TMPing and what have you. So I think they get hit also hard because their most effective tool in like high level competitive play has been sort of pulled out from underneath them. In terms of the three factions that I think are getting hit like in a smaller manner, but still in a noteworthy manner, I think Tomb Kings between Royal Host. I know we didn't see much Royal Host here locally, but between Royal Host taking a hit on the big block of skeletons, needing to bring that down, and not having multiple level 4s in Mort Cult, I think that's like a partial hit to them. High Elves, you mentioned it, Ryan. Like both their dragon and their sisters could be affected, which are two like crux pieces for them in again competitive play. I think High Elves kind of can sort of walk away from this not too bad though, because you can just, as you mentioned, cut down 5 sisters in the block and maybe take a magic item fewer on your dragon, and you're sort of still good with your list. And then I think Beastmen, just from the 4 like the restrictions on multiple casters, probably affects them to some extent. So, yeah, I think those are the ones I'd say. I mean, marginally, I guess it marginally improves the other factions that are not hit as hard. But yeah, I think if you were running a list like with one of the like quote unquote like weaker dragon or dragon equivalent characters like a wyvern or whatever, suddenly like the biggest the biggest fish in the sea between the Warriors of Chaos Dragon and the High Elf one getting reined in a little bit sort of helps you definitely. And then if your list was afraid of poison shooting blocks, well, 2 out of the 3 main poison shooting block armies, and the 2 biggest ones really in Tomb Kings and Orcs and Goblins, have been brought down a little bit by this. So that makes things more like palatable for you if you're running a list that gets countered by that pretty hard. Doesn't affect the Beastman poison shooting block though, but like yeah. Okay, so perfect. Just before we move on here to Ryan and Andrew, from your perspective as like event organizers and pack writers and stuff, do you think these comps, like the 2 systems of comp here, are going to be adopted A, locally or in your own events, and then B, across the broader community, or do you think people will keep going in their own direction? Starting with Andrew.
I think locally we'll probably adopt the combined grand melee arms.
Sure.
And I think for the most part, generally, like in the broader gaming community, I think that's probably the route that's easiest for TOs and stuff to take. So we'll probably see that more often, except for the few groups who have kind of made their own vastly different than the base game comps. I won't name names because we don't need to start beef with people, but I'm sure people know who they are. I think the creators of those comps are a little precious of their product and probably won't change their comps to adjust to this stuff just because they seem to have their own vision of the game and how it should look, and I don't see that changing just because this pack was released. But I think generally speaking, yeah, this will probably be adopted pretty standard across most tournaments you see.
Awesome. Ryan, do you agree with that with Andrew or?
Well, given that I wrote it into the pack for Danny's tournament and the one I gave Andrew for Bloodbath, sure, I think we're going to use it.
To be fair, I haven't read it yet. I've been super busy at work.
That's fine, but that's exactly what I proposed. Was we just smash the 2 of them together and we move forward. And I think, much like we did over the last 18 months, is if we use it for a while and we're comfortable and things are working, that's when we can consider experimenting with moving with fewer and fewer restrictions. Because like until this book came out, like Ottawa was on a trend towards almost removing all comp.
Yeah.
And I think we re-baseline with this new thing Games Workshop's put out, and we move forward. And if people are liking it, we keep doing it. And if people are like itching to try something a little different, then we run a couple events where we peel back some of the restrictions and see if the world explodes or something.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Okay, cool. So yeah, moving on here. Next section of the book, which is I think of interest to basically everybody out there, is the missions as well as changes to how terrain is laid out from the core rulebook. So Ryan, can you sort of recap the changes to how GW is proposing we change player place terrain, and then do you see this as being onboarded across the community?
So Games Workshop's new proposed terrain method uses the same amount of terrain, so 6 pieces in a 2,000 point game on a 6-foot table. But instead of players alternating placing it, they roll off, and then the winner of the roll off places all of the terrain, and then scatters those D3 plus 1 of those terrain pieces 2d6 inches. Which is, I feel like 5th edition 40k had the exact same guidance on how to set up terrain.
Okay.
Terrain features can be placed anywhere on the battlefield, not within 12 inches of the center, and not within 3 inches of another terrain feature. The only exception is like stuff required by the scenario. And yeah, like, so not gonna lie, this is how I like. If I was setting up terrain for a tournament, not using maps and just wanting to lay all of it out and then just tell the players to leave it where it is, this is how I would go around setting up all of the tables before the players ever showed up. I would just like throw terrain and then like roll dice and a scatter die and like rejig stuff around so that it's not really super advantageous to anyone. But like, or if I was like setting up a game in my basement, knowing someone was coming over soon and I didn't want to like, unconsciously shape the table in my favor or something, I do that. This is not how I would have players at a tournament set up terrain. I know, there is a camp that is all for pre-promulgated maps.
Sure.
I think once we get into the missions, it'll become very apparent how convoluted having 65 billion maps
Yeah.
will be. I also hate symmetry, and I feel like things like deployment zone choice should actually be a choice. So, like, in my personal order of preference, I still believe the ideal is the TO just sets up a bunch of tables, followed by player placed terrain. We've been doing it here in Ottawa, where the players roll off and the winner of the roll off, like they just alternate placing terrain. And then lastly, maps. And I think locally we're just going to keep alternating placing terrain, other than at the team tournament where there will be fixed layouts because of how teams works.
Yeah.
What do you
Cool.
guys think?
Yeah, that makes sense, Andrew.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like, it's kind of weird to do in a tournament setting and scattering all those pieces. Usually when you're on time constraints at an event, like that's just gonna add more fucking time, especially if two players decide to be gamey about it, and they're like, "Oh, you rolled an 11, but you only moved it like 10-ish inches," and then they're trying to remeasure. Like, there's gonna be someone who like
Sure.
makes this take longer, and like at least if it's TO pre-placed terrain, or even just the alternating placing of terrain, like that usually goes fairly quick without a lot of issues, and people can get to focusing on their game. This just, for me, as an organizer that usually does have to work within a set amount of time, like anything that takes away from the players actually playing their game, I feel is detrimental, and I just feel this whole process is a little too convoluted to set up a table at the beginning of every round.
Yeah.
Also, I don't 100% agree with the size of terrain list. They give a small sort of set of guidelines on like each piece of terrain counts as X amount if it's a certain size. So, like, for example, I'm looking at the middle one here. If a terrain piece is between 8 inches and 12 inches, that's why it's point. It counts at 2 pieces of terrain. Fuck that. Just put your 6. I know locally we put 7 pieces to terrain. They're all vastly different sizes, but I know there's a few pieces on each of my tables that are like, pretty close to that 8 and 12 inch
Sure.
thing, and we never counted as 2, and it really doesn't change much. Like, it's kind of nice to have a good mix of big and small pieces, but have a lot of it. So yeah, those are my thoughts on it. Like, I think the best way to do it is just TO placed or roll off and alternate place.
Yeah. No, I agree with both of you guys. I don't think this is going to be onboarded widely. I think it's wild, first of all, that like one player gets to set up the entire board as they see fit based off a single d6 roll. Like if the old adage that terrain is the third player is true, then that gives the player who gets to set up all the terrain a massive advantage. And I understand that they haven't picked sides at that point, but still, like army construction comes into play then if you get to like set up your perfect board, all that kind of stuff. And then like you guys mentioned, D3+1 scattering, it's just adds time, and I'm not sure it overly matters all that much, right? So if I'm player number 2, the loser of that roll, and the other guy managed to like set up the board at like up to his perfect designs that he had in mind for his game, the fact that like let's say on average 3 pieces of terrain scatter, and then 1/3 of the time you get the hit and they don't actually move. So 2 pieces of terrain will move up to 10 inches. I don't think is like, to me, that I don't like how that feels as a player. I'd roll with it, sure, but I think there's much better ways of doing this. And I agree with you, Ryan, that like event organizer placed terrain is the best, then player placed alternating and not this system, and then finally this system, and then maps after is like set maps is how I'd see it. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's just before we get into the missions, Ryan, you want to go through all the changes to how points are scored in
Yeah.
the new system? Yeah.
So within this system, it basically overwrites the core rulebook section on like how to score victory points. So the first method to score victory points is dead or fled. Um, so you get 100% of the victory points for every enemy unit that has been destroyed or which has fled off the battlefield during the game. Uh, you get 50% of the victory point cost, rounding fractions up, of any enemy unit that is fleeing at the end of the battle. And you receive 50% of the points cost, rounding up, of any enemy unit that is reduced to 25% of its starting unit strength or less at the end of the battle, or if its unit strength is equal to its starting wounds, to 25% of its starting wounds or less at the end of the battle. And I'm just going to go through the changes like now before
Yeah, yeah.
people forget what I just said. So the first one, like dead, no change. Fleeing is no change.
No change.
But the 25%, so first off, it's no longer under 25%, it's at or below 25%. So if you've got 4 models, you're now no longer immune to this scoring element. If you're down to 1 model, you give up 50% of your unit's points value. Secondly, the bit where if you're starting wounds, so if you are a behemoth or a character on a monster mount or something else where its unit strength is equal to its starting wounds, and you are at 25% or below of your starting wounds, you give up 50%, which you didn't before. So that really helps, squeeze some of those points out of those dragons and
Yeah.
wyverns and things like that. As far as I can tell, this list is cumulative because it nowhere does it say or. It just says you get points for the following things being true, and a unit can be fleeing and at 25% of its unit strength at the same time. Which means, as far as I can tell, unless Games Workshop tells us otherwise, a fleeing unit that is at 25% of its unit strength or starting wounds, depending on whatever, would actually give up 100% of its points value.
Mhm.
Which is certainly an interesting way to, like, bottom of turn 6, snag a bunch of points off a dragon or something.
Yeah.
By like winning a combat. Anyway, this will legitimately have an impact on like how people play turn 5 and 6.
Agreed.
Because like you can like one little thing can swing you from giving up no points to giving up 100% while you're still on the table.
Yep.
So that's that bit. The king is dead. no change. You kill the enemy general, you get 100 points. Doesn't apply to the general of an allied contingent. Good to know.
Yeah.
Trophies of war. 50 victory points for every enemy standard claimed as a trophy. Additionally, if the enemy battle standard bearer is slain or is fleeing the game, you get another 50 victory points. Yay. Special features. So again, if you include special features, they're worth victory points. It's detailed in the secondary mission section and the special features section of the core rulebook. And then breaking the enemy. So if breakpoint is used as a game end condition, which not at 2,000 points, but I could see a tournament doing that if you wanted to do something funky for a weekend or for like a 3-day or 3-round thing. You get 500 victory points for breaking the enemy. This is also like, I personally haven't yet, but this is also kind of a cool thing. You can just bolt on to any mission as an extra way to get victory points. Like you can still say you guys will play 6 turns, but if one of you is broken, you get 500 points. Like
Sure.
it's an extra lever for victory points, I guess. But yeah, all in all, like I kind of went through the key changes which are in the dead or fled space, and that my only real criticism here, because in the draft for the event that Andrew had to take over for me, that was lost to the warp. I had actually toyed around with a similar idea for the starting wounds, but what I did was I removed unit strength from the discussion entirely and just said each enemy unit reduced to 20. I think I said below because that was still the standard at the time. Reduced to 25% of its starting wounds. Just full stop.
Yeah.
So that was like whether it was a brick of 40 infantry or a chariot or like it just didn't matter what it was. If it was
Yeah.
below 25% of its starting wounds, it gave up 25% of its points value. Because right now, like this addresses monsters, but Chaos Lord on a chariot now like can be at
Yeah.
1 wound and gives up nothing.
Yeah. Isn't it starting strength 5? So at 1 wound it would.
No, because it's you only give up the points if
Yeah.
if your unit strength is equal to your starting wounds.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So because it's a heavy chariot, its unit
Yeah.
strength is
It's
just 5.
5. Yeah, and not its
Yeah,
starting wounds. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, exactly. So like chariots are still exempt. Duke on a Royal Pegasus gives up nothing because it's unit strength 3 because it's monstrous cavalry.
Yeah.
So there's still like I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
know. I
There's
thought it was much cleaner to just go off of wounds
agreed.
for
You're right.
everything.
Yeah.
But this is a nice step in the right direction, and it works well enough that I'm not gonna like fight about it.
Yeah, no, but I think you're totally right that it does leave some some little holes that people can. I'm not sure people can exploit, but anyways, it does leave holes. Like the 5 other Iron Demon players in the world are pretty pumped to see that they're not giving up partial points on those. Andrew, what are your thoughts on how we're scoring points, changing?
Yeah, I think the changes are good. Um, it's not like they're vastly different than what was there before. Although I do appreciate that, you know, fleeing and below 25% is now where like as good as being dead. I think that's a cool place to be. And now the change to starting wounds, or sorry, unit strength. I think it's going to make those super killy, invincible dragons a little bit easier to score at least some points off of, and it
Yeah.
will definitely change how people use those units on the board, and maybe not just use them as willy-nilly as they do and sort of squeak out at the end of the game with 1 or 2 wounds left. Like they're now going to have to pick their targets a little better, and hopefully that will also mean they're less effective on the board because you need to preserve those points as well, since
Yeah.
oftentimes they are 25% of your army, right?
Yep. No, I agree with you.
Oh,
I
yeah.
agree with you. Sorry, was that it? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's all positive, I think.
Agreed. I think it is positive. Like, and you're right, Andrew. I hadn't put this in my comments originally when you guys were talking, but like it does also change how people play with their big pieces. Because if, for instance, your I don't know your high elf star dragon is at 5 wounds left, and there's and you're thinking about sending him into combat into something, but that possibility that they'll do 2 or 3 wounds to you but not kill you is now a much more scary prospect than it was before. So I think that's positive. And yeah, no, I agree with the two of you. Like it feels bad, like when you put a bunch of work into beating down a monster or like a save stacking mount, and then you're left with something on 1 or 2 wounds at the end of the game that doesn't give you any victory points for it. So that I think will also change how people play, because especially like just thinking about myself, like there are so many times when I ignore the dragons and just kill off the rest of the enemy army because they don't give up any points until I kill them entirely, and that can be such a difficult thing to do. So especially if your army doesn't have necessarily the right tools for it. So yeah, I think it's all positive stuff. Okay, let's talk about the missions. So without reading everything, just focusing on like the differences, especially there. Let's start with Andrew. You want to go through the first scenario, which is upon the field of glory, which is like the new pitch battle.
Oh yeah. So it's the same deployment as open battle. The setup is basically straight up out of the book, or if you're using the terrain placement rules from this book, the same. Um, Deployment. Players roll off when they pick their deployment zone. What we're used to. And then it's alternating deployment. The game length is up to the TO's discretion, although they give you the options of fixed turn limit, random game length, or breakpoint.
Yeah.
So when you're making your TO pack, you'll pick. Usually it's fixed turns. I think that's kind of the go-to standard. This one has no special rules, and secondary objectives is the baggage train special feature. Or
That's
sorry, it
it.
may
That's
include,
a
but
list.
yeah, there's another list. So there's for your secondaries, you can do the baggage trains, special features, domination, and or strategic locations. So you can stack all these up too and have like some crazy
Yeah.
multiple secondary game. I think maybe we should, before we go further into all these missions, go over the secondaries first, because we're going to be referencing them a lot. And I think that'll dictate also kind of our thoughts on the missions as well. Does that make sense?
Sure, we can do that. Yeah, sure. Ryan, what do you think? You want to do secondaries, or do you want to go through the missions and come back after?
I'm good either way. I think Andrew has a point, though. It's like it'll make some of the comments I have about the missions make more sense if we explain the secondaries first. But
Okay, sure. Sure. Let's do that. Okay. Improvising. Ryan, you want to take
Right,
baggage
Kevin?
trains?
of course, so baggage train is secondary, focused on basically just defending your own supply element while trying to destroy the enemies. So classic medieval maneuver warfare. And so a baggage train should be represented by a little diorama on a 60 to 100 millimeter base. And it gets placed each player places theirs in their deployment zone, not inside of any pieces of terrain and not within 3 inches of the edge of the battlefield in any direction. And once placed, it cannot move for any reason. If in order to control it, you need to have a unit with a unit strength of 10 or more that's not fleeing nor succumb to stupidity within 6 inches. If there's multiple units, the one who's closest controls it. If there's two equally close, like if a friendly and an enemy unit are equally close to it, it's contested and neither unit controls it. To destroy a baggage train, what happens is a unit with a unit strength of 5 or more can attempt to destroy it by moving into contact with it in the remaining move subphase. And then it has to remain there for a full game turn, or almost a full game turn, or a full battle round.
Yeah.
So basically, if the unit can stay there and make it all the way to that player's start of turn phase, going through their opponent's entire turn, then the baggage train will have been destroyed. However, they're doing this understanding the baggage train is like, it doesn't impede line of sight. It's basically just completely flat. It counts as, I want to say, difficult terrain, but
Yeah,
like
if you walk
the
onto
enemy
it.
can charge you through it, like all kinds of things. And if you are in combat or fleeing or anything like that, you cannot, you don't destroy the baggage train. So there's a whole bunch of ways to kind of turn it off. And while you're trying to destroy the baggage train, you can only cast spells with a range of self or combat. So basically, like, you put a unit out of the fight to try and do this. But at the end of the game, for each baggage train you control, you get 100 victory points. And if you have destroyed your opponent's baggage train, you get 250 victory points. So all in, if you still own yours and you've destroyed your enemies, that's a maximum of 350 victory points that you can get. And if you just don't play the secondary at all, you can just kind of defend 100 victory points for yourself. That's how this one works.
Awesome. How do you anything you want to say about it, like sort of at a broader level, aside from just how it works?
Oh, I like this one in a couple of the missions as a just like a thing you add in. Like, it's just an extra thing that makes the two people have to think about stuff, because you can't just like YOLO out of your deployment zone and leave nothing behind, etc. It's not
Yeah.
like a game defining secondary like some of the other ones.
Yeah.
But it does have the potential to have enough points to turn a draw into a win.
Yep. Agreed. Just jumping in here for a sec, sort of walking back a little bit from this one specifically. So if you're listening out there, there's 4 different secondaries. This is the first out of the 4. And unit strength 10 for holding things is going to be something that comes up very often throughout these secondaries and these missions. So already that's shaping a bit list design in terms of, like, if you were bringing min-sized units of 5 infantry, those are not necessarily in a good place right now, and probably need to shift to 10 so that they can have meaningful impact on missions. But parking all of that, so I really like this secondary. I think this is, if we're gonna have secondary objectives, I want them to be like this. It's incredibly thematic. It's super, like, quote unquote historically accurate as much as we can be in a fantasy universe. Like, there are a plethora of historical examples of, parts of armies running off, not listening to orders to go capture baggage trains and pillage baggage trains, and like campaigns being thrown off because baggage trains were destroyed. So the fact that we can have this in game, the fact that you get a cool modeling opportunity out of it, and that it's like thematically accurate to sort of what the broader old world game is like, I think is a home run in terms of designing a secondary objective. I will take this kind of stuff any day of the week over having to stand on a point drawn on the ground in a field arbitrarily from a game design perspective. So that may situate a little bit how I see some of the other secondaries and missions later on. But like, I really like this. I like that you get points for retaining yours, and as well as for like capturing or destroying the enemies. Like that's all great, and it just like opens up different things that you can do in game. I really like that it's at a 350 potential victory point level. That's like the level where I think it's meaningful without warping the game overall. Like it's still a kill point game, and you're still simulating a battle, quote unquote. So yeah, and throwing that in there just like adds some spice, adds different variables to look at, but doesn't denature, I think, the base game. So I really like this. I think this is a great secondary objective, and I wish they were all as slam dunks as this one. Andrew, what are your thoughts on the baggage train?
Yeah, I really like it. I like, basically everything about it. Like you said, it's a really cool hobby project. Even in our own like sort of Discord chats, like everyone's been talking about, oh, I'm gonna do this so it themes with my army. Oh, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna 3D print this little kit because it looks exactly like my Beastmen or whatever. Like I think like the buzz around that's really cool. And I like the fact that um in terms of the victory points, it is enough to maybe sway some of those brackets, especially if you control yours at the end and destroy your opponents. Like, we spoke earlier and kind of highlighted that the 0 to 300 points for 2000 point games being a draw seems like a very big bracket, but when you start taking into account, stuff like the baggage train, and as we'll talk later, like there's a lot of other things like this, like it's very easy to get out of that sort of draw zone if you start focusing on secondaries and anything that's going to sort of change your style of play or make you think, or at least give you options on like, hey, I'm having a hard time killing units, but I'm pretty sure I can get the baggage train, like, so I'm going to go do that instead, and that's going to help me maybe not lose this game or even push me into a win. Like I think that's a really cool way to introduce alternate ways to score points in the game that isn't just here's my objective, let's go sit on it. Like that type of shit's stupid, but like I really like this because it is thematic and it will change how your play style.
Awesome. Cool. Let's move on to the second one. So the second secondary is a special feature. So basically, like just to sum it up for everybody, a special feature is a cool landmark that the two armies are fighting over or around. So like, I don't know, a magic obelisk, like some watchtower that they want to control, a cool statue of whatever significant historic person or what have you, like some item on the field of battle that is of relevance to both armies. So you have this big honking thing that's no wider than 6 inches at its widest point, so it's actually not that big. You place it in the middle of the board, and then you guys have to, as a secondary objective, try to control it at the end of the game. Basically, how it's controlled is very similar to a lot of the other control objectives and missions that you're going to see in this book. So you have to be within 6 inches and have a unit strength of 10 or more, and it needs to be a core unit. So that already situates a little bit the estimate on what you're going to bring in your list. You can't, if you're stupid or if you're fleeing, it doesn't work. And then, as with all these other things, or like the herdstone from Beastman or what have you, you've the unit that's the closest controls it. If two of them are tied, like nobody controls it, that kind of situation. So controlling the landmark is at the end of the game. Whoever ends the battle in control of this thing gets 200 victory points. Now that's all well and fine, and is sort of in line with the other, like is actually almost copy paste of the Beastman Herdstone rules. However, this special feature comes with like some special rules added to it, which I think are pretty interesting and will change how your battle unravels in a very Warhammer way. So basically, the special feature has rules. You've got a table, a D6 table you roll on, and at the start of each turn, and basically start of turn subphase, I should say, and then like your special feature will have different effects. So if you roll a one or a two, basically it gives the unit that controls the special feature gets magic resistance 3, which is quite impactful. A few things of 5 or 6 at the start of turn sub phase, the special feature gives the unit that controls it unbreakable, which is another super powerful rule. So yeah, all in all, I think this is I like this secondary. I think it's one of the stronger ones also. Like I like fighting over, there's this whatever statue or these prisoners, or I don't know what it is, but like the special feature is, I think, is an interesting thing to fight over. Like I like the amount of victory points. 200 for me feels about right. I like the 200 300 type ish scale for a secondary objective. So that's all fine. And I like that it gives out a semi-random buff to the unit that's protecting it. Gives you a bit of a more of a reason to go for it before the end of the game, which is like an interesting dynamic. I think overall this is all good. It's decently thematic. Like this could be a bridge over a river. It could be a lot of things, but it's I like it. It's something. Yeah, it's something that'll spice up your games. Andrew, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I like it. It does put more onus on the TO to supply special features. So great, more work for me. But I do like it. Again, I think the victory points for controlling it is just the right amount. Um, it's not as big as say if you get both victory points for the baggage train. But it's enough to, again, like if you focus on it, it could push you into a new bracket when playing, and then being able to, if you are the one controlling it, like getting those weird unusual properties, like it helps that defending unit sort of keep it. So yeah, I like this. Again, it's very thematic. It brings in some cool narrative elements to the missions as well. You know, um, a reason for those two armies to be fighting is right here on the rules. So like I like it. It's a good one. Maybe not as cool as the baggage train, but yeah, it's up there.
Awesome, Ryan.
So I think this one is less suited for tournament play, but that's mainly just because of the like. I guarantee you, like, if people can't remember to roll on a fucking weather table that someone implemented in a tournament, they're not gonna remember to roll on a table for their special feature that they're controlling. Uh, and then they're gonna conveniently remember having whatever the most convenient result was last time. That's my only reason about it.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Like I don't know, I don't like admin for the sake of admin. That's all. But
Yeah.
other than that, like this is not horribly different than the
Yeah.
like capture the hill mission that already exists. You can just plug it into any of the missions, which is cool.
Probably not that one though, but like yeah.
No, I mean like the capture and control, like
Yeah.
the wizard's tower
Yeah.
mission, not the King of the Hill mission.
Yeah.
Although you could have a tower on top of the hill, and that's
Yes.
worth another
1400
200
points.
victory
Yeah.
points at the end of the fucking game.
Yeah.
That would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is actually the only secondary that didn't get used in what I developed for Danny and Andrew, but it largely
Like that.
has to do with the like as we start going through the missions, you'll see some of them have like a secondary baked into them already, and I didn't want to have more than one secondary per mission.
Yeah.
And then this is the one that just kind of like never fit in anywhere, or if I was going to use it, it would wind up being in the first mission where it's like upon the fields of glory with a special feature and baggage train. But then again, it puts a thing on Andrew of, well, now you need a designated special feature for every single table times 50 or times 25. Like that's, you know, I'm not here to make work for Andrew if I can avoid it. So
Sure. Awesome. That works. Cool. So we all sort of like it. Let's go to the next one. Ryan, you wanna take domination number 3?
Sure. Table quarters. You divide the table into quarters. It gives the worst possible way to explain how to divide a
Yes, 2
rectangle into
lines.
four quarters.
Exactly.
You're using 4 lines.
Yeah. How?
You need 4 lines that meet in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
middle, but as soon as they meet,
Okay.
they have formed a
Yes.
singular line.
Yes. I know.
Um,
I know. I had to look at the graphic for that, and I was like, "This is dumb." Yeah.
yeah, this is written. This is written like someone has never seen a rectangle before.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
like they've own. It's like they've come out of a cave and they've
Yeah.
only ever imagined the smoke-filled imagery of a rectangle. But
Exactly.
anyway, in order to control it, at the end of the game, you total up how many models you have wholly inside that table quarter and add up all their unit strength as long as they're not fleeing. And whoever has more unit strength in the table quarter owns that table quarter. So it's pretty cut and dry on that front. If you control a table quarter, you get 100 victory points. If the unit strength of models controlling the quarter is more than twice that of the enemy in that quarter, you get 150 victory points. If you control the table quarter uncontested, you get 200 victory points. And I'm just going to say this now to anyone out there that is attempting to argue that if you control an uncontested table quarter, you get 250 victory points because any number is more than double zero.
No.
No. um, just no. So,
Yeah.
and I mean, like you can also counter that argument with twice zero is actually zero.
Yeah. Sure.
So math
Anyways.
kind of solves
So
that itself. But anyway, it's neat. It makes you move around on the board. You want to spread out. You get no benefit from doing something like leaving your dragon straddling 2 table quarters, at which point it's actually contributing to neither of them. Um, but yeah, like I like the fact that this makes you move and like spread out on the board, but also it's not necessarily penalizing to something like dwarves because you do have 6 turns to kind of like dominate space. But at the same time, because you have to spread out, it's antithetical to things like only taking a handful of very expensive monsters or taking a single giant Death Star. Um, because, okay, cool, I can't kill your 1100 point brick of dwarves, but I can go get 600 victory points just by existing in the rest of the table. Um, so it's got stuff. I like this one.
yeah. I like it. I like it. I like it, and I guess I'm mitigated. Like I'm of two minds on it. So I don't like the narrative construct of like you must go sit in each of these 4 corners to rack up points. That doesn't really necessarily fit with how I view the game. So there is that. I also am not sure that I'm a fan of. So theoretically, I guess you would have to table your opponent, but like theoretically, you could get up to 800 victory points on this secondary, which I think is a massive swing. Like I'm playing in an online event right now where essentially the secondary results in an 800 victory point swing, and that is too much as far as I'm concerned. But anyways, all that being parked, like my sort of theoretical or philosophical objections to it. I don't hate how it's implemented. I like that there's different levels of scoring you can get out of this 100, 150, and 200. And I think it does impact your list design for sure. Like you want the fact that this secondary exists and it's probably going to show up in I don't know 2 of your 5 or 6 games at an event means you kind of have to plan for it, and it brings you towards it leads you towards bringing more individual units in your army to be able to spread out. This one is not one of the 10 unit strength is required to control. So theoretically, if you have a single model in a quarter that's unoccupied, you do get like a 200 point maxed out of it. So that is interesting. I think it automatically like makes cheap units like warhounds or dinky little 45 point bolt throwers suddenly more relevant, because the warhounds can go get unoccupied quarters, and the stuff like bolt throwers can just lock down quarters for you or ensure that you have a presence in quarters. And I think units with ambushers are now much more interesting and relevant. This tiny unit of 5 gores isn't showing up until, I don't know, I messed up my rolls turn 5. But when it does show up, oh, look at that, there's an unoccupied table quarter. I could just dump it in and get 200 victory points out of it for a 35 point unit. I forget how much the cost of the ambusher upgrade on them is, but like that's an interesting way to use cheaper units. I think as the game is currently played before this pack comes out, those cheap units just end up giving up victory points and never really scoring anything. So now that they actually have a way of getting their points back or bringing you in the positive in terms of points gained, I think that actually makes them more relevant. Yeah. Andrew, what do you think about domination?
I like I like it, but I think I'm in agreement with you. Like I think the points you get out of it is maybe a little too high. Um
Just
Even if they
wait.
did like yeah, I know it's coming. I know it's coming. Um Even if they just half those points, I think it'd be a lot better and a lot less like super swingy if you just sort of like spread out and take your board, or yeah, take over like the whole table. Um Obviously you have to prevent your opponent from countering that, but I think yeah, just the points you earn from having table quarters is a little bit too overtuned. Um and it's a lot less balanced than the last two
Yeah.
uh the last two we spoke about.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
being said, I do like the mechanic of going out and like you need to hold the table quarter, you need to be the only one in it, because I'm not like you still kind of need to fight your opponent to make sure you have control of those table quarters. You still need to engage with units that are there to make sure like you take over those areas of the table, or at least make sure you have the most unit strength in those quarters. So it's not like you all of a sudden start playing a null game. You still have to engage with your opponent. So I like that aspect of it. It's just it's really high,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
because I can see that steamroll or snowballing with, say, I push for this table quarter, I kill the units that are there, so already I'm getting those points from just the primary scoring, and then now I have this table quarter, so I might get another 200 victory points. Like that's a lot. That's a big
Yeah.
swing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's wild that like the last secondary objective was 200 victory points at the end of the game, and this one's up to 800.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I
Okay,
like it, but I don't like it.
cool. You want to take the last one? Explain the last one, Ryan.
Sure. Yeah. So strategic locations is like progressive objectives, effectively. So it comes in 2, 3, or 4 flavor. Where uh, the 2 version, you basically have an objective on the at the 12-inch mark on the long table center line. Um, Only way I can really describe it. Basically, at the edge of each deployment zone in open battle or whatever it's called. The 3 objective version has kind of equally spaced objectives just along the long center line of the table. And then the 4 objective version is the 2 objective version and the 3 objective version combined with no objective in the center of the table. So you basically just have along the short and long center line, halfway between the table center and the table edges, you have 4 objectives. So the way this one works is that the objective markers are placed. It says after the battlefield's been set up before deployment begins, but that you can't have any terrain within 3 inches of an objective marker, so you move the terrain out of the way. So like when I wrote my event pack, I just switched that and said put down the objective markers, then deploy the terrain. Um,
Yeah.
because it makes more sense. To control an objective marker, you need an objective marker is controlled by a single core unit that's within 6 inches of it that has a unit strength of 10 or more, that's not fleeing and hasn't succumbed to stupidity. All the same caveats. If 2 are equally close,
Yeah.
then the closer one gets it. They're equidistant. The one with the higher unit strength gets it. Blah blah blah. Victory points. So this one's progressive. So at the end of each player turn, the player who controls an objective scores 30 victory points. So there's 12 instances
Yeah.
where you could score per turn. So there's like 360 points per objective that's
Yeah.
theoretically available.
Yeah, 1440 up for play if you have the 4 objectives.
Yep, or 1080 or 720,
Yeah.
depending on what you want to do. So this one's an interesting one. Like, I have been, a vocal non-proponent of sit on this spot on the map and farm points. But at the same time, I actually do think, given how the mechanics of Old World works and the way they implemented objectives and the locations they placed the objectives in these missions, it works for me. Like I'm viewing it more as shaping where you want to go fight on the map for whatever reason, or like even down to the fact that effectively these create clear lanes through terrain that you may want to secure, or however you want to look at it. But effectively, like, those are the spots you're going to go fight over, and because of the like give ground versus fall back in good order pursuit mechanic, the objectives create situations where now like pursuing isn't always going to be the default, you know, choice after a combat or whatnot. Like, you actually will have choices based around, do I follow up? Is that going to take me off of the objective? Maybe we don't need to continue this combat. Maybe I just need to prepare for the charge so that I can tend to my wounded comrades that died taking this pile of barrels that didn't need to exist. So it's, I think, within how the game works that the objectives will work. And like, I like that the 3 objectives like basically make you go scrum in the middle of the table. The 2 objectives, you want to go break through your enemy's front line, because if neither of you break through, you're both just farming points at the exact same rate.
Yeah.
So it's one of those, like, those 2 objectives don't matter until someone's ambushers come off the back and take it from you, or you break through and seize it. Like, and the 4 objective one kind of has the best of both of those, where yeah, you have your objective, but then you're going to be out fighting over the middle ones and trying to break to the other one. Anyway, I think they work. Debates about how many points. I have kind of a whole thing that I'll save for the very end about my thoughts on the number of points that the various objectives give. But ultimately, like, I think these things do give a nice place for things like ambushers and scouts too, where like, people saw, oh, having scouts degrades my chance to go first, and I want to go first. So people started, not taking scouts anymore. But now scouts giving you the ability to maybe get an extra 30 points because you're already on the objective at the start of the first player turn of the first turn, where you're already in the enemy's depth. Um, you know, me, fixing them so they can't move away from their objective with too much, so that you don't swoop in and take it. I also think things like ambushers actually are going to add value in the
Yep.
strategic locations 4 and 2, in a way where, like, the same way you talked about in dominance, basically, like
Yep.
where they're so these things, while I know the two of you are going to have a whole bunch of issues, um, they do open up a whole bunch of other ways to use units in the game that were just not viable in the way it was currently being played. Um, anyway, that's it.
Yeah. Andrew, you want to to go next before I sort of tear into this a little bit?
Well, I fuck's sakes. I can see Ryan's line of thinking, but I still very much don't like this because while it does maybe force you to push and do things in the game, especially on the 2 and 3 objective options, it also is dictating where on the board you're going to have to play the game. And I think that might hurt some builds. Right off the top of my head, I'm thinking like Wood Elf, Shoot, and Avoidance. I feel like they
Yeah.
might have
They're in a bad
they're gonna
place with
have
this. Yeah.
they're gonna have some issues with this style of mission. Also, you know, is this where we're gonna start seeing the 6-inch circle mouse pads all over the fucking table like 40k? Like it's gonna look stupid.
Yeah.
That being said, I do like that it will force you to maybe add some types of units to the game or to your list that you might not take, just so you have some ability to objective control. Um, and Ryan touched on it too. Like, I think ambushers get a lot of added value in missions like this. And, when he said that, I was also thinking back to even the baggage train. Like, I think ambushers now play a
Mhm.
new role in that if you're playing that secondary. So I like that it gives somebody to other types of units or makes you think about bringing other types of units. um I don't like how it dictates like where on the board you're gonna play.
Yeah.
I like that to be a little bit more free form and based on trying to outmaneuver your opponent and trying to second guess where they're gonna go. Like in missions like this that use these objectives, you already know kind of where the game's gonna be played on the table. That's kind of my negative about it. Otherwise, like 30 points per turn to control it or whatever, like I think that's okay. I think that's probably about right where it should be, although I can also see where certain armies are going to be able to just all of a sudden steamroll ahead on points if they control too many of these too quickly. So again, I think it penalizes like slower armies or sort of MSU style armies who aren't meant to be like just staying on a point fighting.
Yeah.
What do you think,
Agreed.
Kevin?
I'm not a fan. I don't like it. I don't like it very much. I will say so. The only positive thing for me in this one is, as you both touched on, like it makes new units that you wouldn't take in your list otherwise be more viable. And I think that is a positive, right? Like the fact that you'll see on, if I think to my own army there, the 5 wolves that are unit strength 10, the well, they're not in core, so that's a bad example, but like the 10 hobgoblins that people don't generally take, are now much more viable as just like a 30-point item that can hold down all these different points scoring methods in the game. So I think that's great because it makes some things more that previously didn't see much play much more important. Like your Chaos Warhounds, which some people already swear by, are now amazing as a result of all these changes to objectives. I don't like the fact that we're moving in the direction of a bunch of holding a bunch of points, arbitrary points on the map. Like, and I especially don't like progressive scoring because that always feels super gamey to me, right? Like we're fighting this big medieval-esque battle, and I will have a unit sitting in the middle of my deployment zone, not participating in the big fight in front of them because it has to be farming points. Like that to me doesn't work narratively and
Opposed to defending the
thematically.
baggage train.
Well, that's already a lot better, right? Like to
But I'm saying
then
the objective can be whatever you want it to be. The objective
sure,
could be
like
your king.
I
Like,
get you, but there's not 4 baggage trains in the middle of this battlefield that you're fighting around, right?
like the center line
Sure,
ones are harder to sell. Yes.
like sure, but and then if you start to do, and I think you're denaturing or you're changing the overall theme of the game when you're like, okay, so up to 1440 points are up for grabs for sitting on these, and then if you do something completely dumb, like you stack it on top of the hill, like King of the Hill, suddenly you've got 2600 points that are just up for grabs for sitting on places in a game that has 2000 point armies. Like that's I don't even at that point I can't even say anymore that it's a kill it's a kill point game, right?
So here's one question, just to
Yeah.
throw it out here. Yes, the 4 objectives add up to 1440 points. In what situation is someone
No,
actually
yeah.
going to be able to score 1440
Yeah,
points
I
when one
think
of the objective is in the other player's deployment zone?
agreed. I think that I think the more realistic score that you're going to end up seeing on this one is probably closer to the 500 point mark. Even if you've got 2 and you're holding on yours for most of the game, you're looking at 360 points as a gimme there. So yeah, and then it also yeah, I don't like it, man. So if I take a unit of 10 hobgoblins, unit strength 10, and I park them in the back of my deployment zone all game or mid deployment zone all game, that 30-point unit has not done anything and has made 360 points. It's I don't know. To me, it
And
just
it takes
feels
one
so.
casualty and becomes useless.
Yeah, I take 12 then for 36 points or what have you,
Yeah.
right? But you understand my point that I think it's thematically it runs in such a different direction than the rest of the game than how the game's thought out. And they did something, so I think it was thematic and it was not too impactful in terms of the baggage train and domination where you're looking at 300 to 200 to 300 points or whatever. And then you flip to this one and it's a and even domination, and it's a massive shift, right? So anyways, you guys have heard me. I'm not a huge fan, but I'll live with it, and it'll force changes to lists, that's for sure, right? When you combine this with comp and you combine this with the main missions and then the secondaries, people will have to adapt their lists, because if I've got all these points for grabs and I keep running what I'm running right now, it's not going to work, right? So okay. So as we park secondaries before we head back out, so anything you guys want to say? Do you think these are fun? Overall, are you like the new system? Do you think it'll be adopted widely? And then yeah, what are just altogether? What are your thoughts, Ryan?
So I think you'll see wide adoption purely just because it's a common set of things. But where I think you're gonna see TOs make a mistake is putting more than one or the wrong combination of 2 secondaries into these missions. Like people are going to see you can add baggage train, special feature, domination, and then just go
Yeah.
and be like, here's a mission with like 3,000 extra victory points.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
go. I think that is gonna fuck up some shit. But I think if you just put one in each of the missions that's presented here, except King of the Hill, which honestly, King of the Hill is a secondary disguised as a mission. Um, I think that they will work, but part of that also goes into like I'll kind of talk about it at the end of talking about missions, but like um if you use like so we've got 6 missions and I've developed a bit of a tournament pack that's got each of the secondaries only used once, and then King of the Hill doesn't have an additional secondary. And what it forces is different army archetypes are better at different mission
Yeah.
slash secondary combos. And like because right now, like yes, it right now, yes, it is a kill points game. This tournament pack is very much structured as a quote unquote victory points game, not as much of a kill points game.
Mhm.
They even get away from using the term kill points at all.
Yeah.
But it's by doing it that way, by having basically every mission favor a different archetype or disadvantage a different archetype, means you can show up to an event and you're going to have hard missions and you're going to have hard matchups, and those like you may have a good mission with a bad matchup, you may have a good matchup and a bad mission, but like you're doing a different thing every time, and it'll just be kind of a balancing game of having an army that can play the missions while having an army that can still fight your opponent. Um, and you've got to do both, and it just creates a bunch of problems you have to solve.
Fair. Yeah, I generally agree with that. Andrew, what are your thoughts on overall the whole system?
I like it. I like that it gives you options to spice up the missions that are presented. Um, it's also a way to basically like every time you play, you're gonna have a vastly different experience if the TO takes advantage of all the options that are here. So, even if you play the first one that we covered, which is basically open battle, depending on which one of these secondaries you layer in, each one of those games is going to be vastly different despite having the same deployment and the same like other rules attached to that mission. So I think it's a cool toolbox to have for TOs to keep your meta from getting a little bit stale or your events from being kind of always samey. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. Now, that being said, we've already said that, like, not all of these secondaries are equally good, at least in our eyes, but, it's nice to have those options. And just to touch back on objectives, it is only core models that can control objectives. So I think
Yeah.
that does lessen the impact of how bad this could swing a mission. But again, um, I guess we'll have to test it and see it. So overall, I think this is a good system to have, and I enjoy, basically to some extent most of these secondaries.
Yeah. So no, that's I agree with you. I think this will be widely adopted. I know there's a significant portion of the player base that enjoys like objective type play. So that's they'll be super happy by with a lot of these and a lot of the missions that we'll talk about in a few seconds here. And then if you're more narratively focused, like I think you'll be very happy with a baggage train or fighting over a special, chapel or whatever. Like, so there's a little bit of something for everybody. I guess overall, what I don't like, and I think what will require a lot of thought from TOs is, like different armies are impacted very unevenly by these secondaries. So I think these secondaries often, especially for the ones that have like meaningful points values, favor, if you have in your core high mobility options that, are usually cavalry, they're packing multiple unit strength per model, especially if they have scout, which is the best, and then ambushers is like a second good thing to have. Like, you're going to be very happy with this kind of situation. So I don't know, Andrew, you play Dark Elves, like having your Dark Riders with Scout unit strength 2 for relatively ish cheap packages that you don't have a choice to take because they're like, you've got to fill up your core. I think puts you, for instance, or puts that army in as an army who benefits from this system overall. But then you have other armies, if you don't have any cavalry options in core, if you don't have any scouts in core, if you got limited access to ambushers or no access to ambushers, it's definitely like a bit more of an uphill battle. So yeah, I think TOs will need to think through this very carefully in terms of which secondaries they pair with which missions and which secondaries they're going to be using and how, because otherwise I think there's going to be some unintended like consequences to this and impacts, and some of your player base is potentially going to feel like they're getting the short end of the stick in terms of how these missions are designed. Like, if you're I don't know. Well, thinking of my own army, like I have 0 cavalry, scout, or ambushing options in core, and all the infantry is max 4 inches movement. So this is something that's harder to contend with, and it's not about like, hey, here's a tiny violin and listen to me cry about how I'm unfortunately impacted by this. There are like other armies in that boat, so just something to think about for TOs. And like, I think Ryan, you hit it in that. Like, it's something you did think about in that draft pack that you've already put together of like making sure they match up well. But like, I think it pushes towards certain army constructs that different armies can do in different ways better or more effectively than others. So I'll stop there. Unless you guys have anything you want to say on that, but
No, the rest will come out during the missions.
okay.
It makes more sense that way.
Okay, so just going. Yeah, go ahead,
I
Andrew.
do have something to say based on like you using my army as an example.
Yeah.
Sure. Say something like the objective missions. I guess I do have a bit of an edge because I do take 2 units of Dark Riders at least.
Yeah.
But at
how
the
many
same
Dark Riders?
time, it'd be 2 units of 5.
Well, he'll take more
Right.
now, but yes.
But that's what I'm saying though, is like you take
Not
one
necessarily,
casualty
though.
and they're not scoring shit.
Yeah, or
Well,
maybe he
that,
takes
but
3,
also
or yeah.
those are 2 units in my army that already have a very specific role that helps me win my games that I now have to repurpose to do something else, and they're now not supporting my overall army, right? So it's either I lose that mobility and sort of scoot around like my enemy line shooting and being annoying, to now having to park those units on specific spots. So overall my army's effectiveness on the table is actually less if I'm going for those objectives. So I'd have to like repurpose almost the whole use of those Dark Riders in my list to
Yep.
actually make them go for those secondary objectives. So like, I understand where you're coming from, but I think too, like, it's going to change how those units are used in the game, and they won't be like, I can't use them as chaff anymore, right? They now have a role to play, and I might have to bump them up 1 or 2 models to keep them
Yeah, you
viable
will.
as objective
Yeah,
scores.
yeah.
So it's like it fundamentally changes how my list works, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think everybody needs, like, my point is everybody needs to change how their lists work because of this pack. But some armies have options to tech into this, whereas others have very few
Sure.
options, right? Like at least you have that piece, right?
True.
Yeah. So okay, so just going back to but you are correct in that, like, I think nobody escapes this unscathed. Like, everybody, even if you're, I don't know, your Knights of the Realm, maybe they are becoming an objective grabbing piece now, unfortunately, because that's all you've got in core that could sort of do it, right? But we'll all need to adapt. Okay, so
Hey
just
man,
going back.
I've walked my men at arms across the entire length of the table multiple times. So
Like, I agree, and that's fine for the ones that score at the end of the game. But like, if they're scoring from turn 1, like, cavalry is obviously the better option, right?
sure.
Yeah.
But like the center line's only 12 inches away.
Yeah, fair. Okay, so let's go back to so scenario 1, like it's basically open battle with added that you could put some secondary objectives on it, like baggage trains. You can basically put all of them on it, essentially. Dealer's choice. Anybody want to like volunteer anything there for the changes to with secondary objectives to open battle? Or
Sure,
are
I'll
we?
go.
Yeah. Go.
Yeah. So this is the one for Danny's tournament pack and Andrew's draft one that wound up with baggage train. You'll see why later on. Like the strat locations and domination are actually baked into some of the other missions.
Yeah.
But this is the one where like you know how certain other people talk about like you could just run an all open battle event.
Hmm.
You legitimately could do an entire day of just this deployment and be like
Yeah.
baggage train
Yeah.
round 2 special feature round 3 domination, like you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is your Swiss Army knife of a mission,
Yeah.
but for our purposes, and I believe it's probably going to be played, but for our upcoming event in July or
July.
whatever
Yep.
it is, it'll
19th of
be
July.
this deployment. It'll be this deployment with baggage train. um so yeah.
Yeah. It's a nice combo. I like it. And you're right. Like you can easily do a 5-game event where you say, the first one, there's no secondary. The second one, it's like you get 2 objectives, then you do baggage train, special feature, domination, and then the 5th game you have 4 objectives or whatever. And it feels like a
Exactly.
completely different game every time.
Yes. I
Okay.
will also just make one macro comment about all of these missions, which is that I like the choice they made that they all use the long table edge.
Yes.
Um, because just running events with tables all butt to butt to butt, it's just nice.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. The old battle for the pass or whatever there, the mountain pass one
Yeah.
was annoying, and half the time you have to ask your opponent to move your stuff for you, and it's always like it's not ideal.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Ryan, you want to take King of the Hill?
Yes. So setup is as normal, except you put uh, a up to 12 by 18-inch hill in the center of the table. And then the deployment zone is 22 inches deep. No, that's not right. 14 inches deep. Um, but you lose 8 inches on the side. So it's similar to like the breakpoint deployment zone in the main rulebook, I guess, but with a big fuck off hill in the middle of the table. And then the hill special rule is that um basically you can control the hill like an objective or whatever. So a single core unit within 9 inches of the center of the battlefield that has a unit strength of 10 or more, isn't fleeing and isn't succumbed to stupidity, controls the hill. If there's 2 units equally close, the one with the closest unit controls it, sorry. If there's 2 or more eligible units equally close, the unit with the higher unit strength controls it. If all other conditions are the same, it's contested. Additionally, there's the running uphill special rule, which is that Vanguard moves cannot be made in this scenario, which totally helps. And then the spicy part, victory points. The player who controls the hill at the end of each player's turn gets a bonus 100 victory points. So there's 1,200 victory points on the table for fighting over this hill. And this scenario could include baggage train or the special features secondary objective. As I said, when I built something out, I treated the hill as a secondary and didn't want to add more points.
A tower on
Um,
top of the hill. Yeah.
hill with tower. I mean, that would like I would totally play that mission, but not in a tournament.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but it's one of those. So this is an interesting one. I agree. You and I Kevin and I had a discussion a while ago about this. Like, this one feels weird as a progressive scoring thing. Like, just from like the reason you fight over hills is to take the dominating piece of terrain.
Yeah.
So like owning it for a moment in time before getting shoved off the hill by the other guys and like scoring 100 points is like very gamey and not particularly thematic. And like of all of the various things is actually the like hardest one for me to justify. Like I can narratively justify away points on the map with enough, you give me enough writing and I can explain that
Of
somehow.
course. Yeah,
But
yeah,
this
of course.
but this one's weird. However, from like that aside, from a like mission design gameplay standpoint, the like each of the missions paired with a secondary is gonna make you do different things on the table, and this is the core unit scrum in the middle of the battlefield fist fight.
Yeah.
Um, because the interesting thing is, since it needs to be a core unit, like you want to send up your elite units to protect your core so the core can still score, but also keep away. Like you almost want to have like a non-core elite unit with a core unit of like robust unit strength behind it, so that that elite unit is actually doing the fighting on the hill, trying to keep the enemy core unit away, while your core unit tries to like dominate the hill and score the points. Because if you actually just put two core units on the hill, like slap fighting each other, it's actually, you're just going to get flanked by the enemy's supporting units, and it's
Yep.
going to be terrible.
Mhm.
So there is kind of like a weird strategy to it, and again, it's just going to encourage this like big mosh pit in the middle of the table,
Yeah.
that in
Yeah.
a way that the other missions don't. Um,
Agreed. Yeah, I am. I'm not a fan of this one. Like I like 5 of the 6 missions a lot. I'm a big fan of like overall, but this is the one I don't like very much. I think 1,200 points for controlling the hill in a like a progressive manner is just too much. Like to me, this will always, because it feels like it removes a lot of player agency, and all the other arguments you've heard from me earlier this evening about how this is not how the game is like designed. But parking that for a bit, like it removes player agency, because it feels to me like this mission becomes a little bit like when you have, you know, toddlers playing soccer or football, depending on where you are in the world. Everybody's just crashing the ball all the time, right? And nothing else matters other than getting to the ball. And this is a bit how this feels. Like the hill is like just is such a dominating feature in this game because of all the points that are tied to it, that like it feels like everybody's just going to be crashing the hill, and you're going to be score, and like that's just going to make what the entire game's going to revolve around. And then when you add to the fact that like 1,200 points plus killing whatever's on that hill to seize it, like you're scoring well over the enemy's entire army value in terms of just fighting over this hill in the center, which like makes sense to me if you're at the end of the game who controls it. Like if that was the whole reason for the battle, sure. But like for this racking up points in time while you're doing it, like I don't, it doesn't make sense to me. Like I don't like it. I think potentially if you want to mix it up a little bit, and I know you haven't done that, Ryan, but like baggage trains at least forces you to keep some things away from the hill to prevent your baggage train from being stolen and potentially going to steal your opponents or destroy your opponents. So maybe that sort of helps pull out things a little bit. But certainly, yeah, if you double down and have this special feature on a hill, especially, like it becomes, I think, just so wildly different than all the 5 other missions that yeah, it feels like this was designed by somebody else essentially. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this one. We'll see how it shakes out, but I'm not a huge fan. Andrew.
Yeah, like I like it. I like it if it didn't have secondaries attached. Like I think it's fine. 100 points. Um at the end of the game, but once you start adding in,
It's at the end of each player turn, so it's 1,200 points. Yeah,
holy shit.
yeah.
That's overall.
but again, like
Um
conceptually, you're gonna push each other back and forth. Like, if you take the hill and just keep scoring, you were probably gonna win the game on killing anyway.
Sure.
Sure, but like again, like also armies are impacted differently, Ryan, because like,
Yeah.
if you play Bretonians, like you tend to be more like that tends to be a much more aggressive army, like that you fight more often in your opponent's deployment zone than in your own or in the center of the board, right? So
And
like
it has no staying power to hold the top of the hill with
Yeah,
core units.
it's all
yeah,
core
sure.
units. So like the
No,
fact
no,
that
but my
it's
point
only
is
core
like
units that can control it really
yeah.
mitigates how bad this can actually get though. Because
Yeah,
who
but
has
I
like
guess
super good core units? Not a lot of people.
uh well, I mean,
See?
hard to kill. No, no, I guess so. Hard to kill like core units that you could just park on there. Like you could take a
Undead.
500. Like undead will wreck this scenario. I think dwarves have a good shot. I mean, I can make some pretty effective unkillable core infantry and chaos dwarves, right? Like that's
But you're
fine.
making a list specifically to win this mission, so will it be good on the others?
No, it won't. That it won't. It
And
won't.
and
So
So that's
and
it.
this
Like
is the
people
point.
won't do that and like
yeah.
I think the fact that the caveat on controlling the hill is core takes a lot of the bad out of what this could potentially get to, other than undead probably like just completely fucking dominating this mission.
Yeah. The royal
Um
host guy is
but
laughing
but
all the
even
way to
then
the bank.
they're slow as fuck. So like
Because also it's proximity ahead of unit strength. So like
No, no,
if
tracking. Yeah.
you win combat and bump them back 2 inches, your smaller unit that's sitting at the center of the hill takes the hill. So like it's not like just shoving a big unit is like auto doing it.
No, I agree. I agree with all of that. I guess my point was like the army you're playing has a massive impact on your ability to compete in this mission. And then if your opponent has something that competes well in this, then like it's just like it's a massive uphill battle, and there's no way to swing back from 1,200 points. Like if you brought a gun line, like we talked earlier about how the comp makes Empire cannons and gun line Empire more viable, you're in a shit spot if you roll this mission, especially if your opponent has like fast core or is like an aggressive army, right? If and the point I was making with Bretonians is not that they're great for holding the hill. The point is that like turn one, I get you won't have Vanguard moves in this one, but like turn two, I'm charged by a bunch of peg knights in my deployment area, right? Like, and then like because they have so much board control, it makes fighting for that hill very difficult, right? So, anyways, yeah.
But I guess that was the same point I was getting at earlier, though, is every mission a different archetype is better at. So if you're playing a suite of 5 to 6 of these missions, the army that's going to be amazing at King of the Hill is going to be very bad at encirclement. Um, and
I
that's
think the only
like that's the
real
leveler
issue with this
across an
mission
event.
Yeah. Andrew?
I think the only real issue with this mission is the awarded victory points. So
100% agreed.
again,
Yeah.
so like the way to score isn't really the issue. It's just it's 100 points. So
Yeah.
potentially 200 points an actual turn. If
Yeah.
it was something like 50 or 25, I think all of a sudden it's in a lot better space. It's still something you would want to focus on doing, but you can also somewhat ignore it and just try to table your opponent or get like more things. Like I think it's the prize is too big to ignore. You
Yeah.
have to
That
play the secondary, which then means it's not really a secondary, is it?
But in this case,
Or I
exactly.
it's
guess
not a
it's not
secondary;
a
Yeah.
it's
second.
the mission.
You're right. You're right. You're right. It is the mission, but I
Yeah.
just think that's too juicy of a fucking prize. The actual
Yeah.
scoring part of it and it being core, like I think that's all good. It's just 100 points is a lot.
Yeah. And yeah,
Again,
that's
we'll
my
have to see
yeah.
how it plays out too, because maybe we're just armchair generaling this and thinking it's worse than it is, and it actually, you know, in actual play, like it becomes a non-issue. Um, again, look like using my army as an example, like Do I really want to park my main killing unit, which is the witches on the hill? Not really, because they
No.
need to be off doing stuff. My horses, well, they're gonna last maybe a turn before they're just fucking deleted because they're not meant to be doing things like that. So all of a sudden,
Yeah.
I'm on defensive mode because I'm just trying to fight, and I'll be playing the old way of playing the game as opposed to doing like primary this mission.
Yeah.
And I think other people will have to make that choice too. But yeah, like I don't know. You'll have to see it in play because I'm torn because I think it's not that bad, but at the same time, it's just I see 100 points a turn
Yeah,
or
and then
play
when you
around and like
yeah, exactly. And then Andrew, when you like that's like all very valid points. When you match up against vampire counts and they park 2 units of 40 zombies on that hill, like you have no options there.
yeah, dude, witches they'll eat that fucking unit in one turn, two
Sure, but
turns
then
max.
like you come back to the point that they get wrecked, right? Anyways, so it's a
So
long.
how long are the zombies taking to get on the hill?
So from their
3
deployment zone,
turns.
it's only no, not that much, because from their deployment their zone they're only 10 inches away, and like 10 inches is to the center of the hill. So haven't got the exact measurement here, but it's so measuring no more than 12 by 18. That is when you're 10 inches away from the start. That's not very far, right?
Right. I just my point is they can't march.
No, but they can get reserve moved, but they can get there pretty
Sure.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, I think we've beat this horse to death. Okay.
You also missed your own pun earlier, and
What was my pun?
oh yeah, you described how it would be an uphill battle,
Oh yeah,
um,
fair enough.
for some armies, and it
Yeah,
made me
it
laugh.
would it would be an
So
absolute uphill battle in all senses of the pun. Okay, so drawn battle lines. So yeah, you want to take this one, Ryan?
sure. So this one you set up normally. You deploy in triangles. The triangles being basically one corner of your long table edge up to half of the far short table edge. So it's like easy triangles instead of
Yeah,
actually having to do math triangles, creating a 24-inch gap diagonally between the two armies. Um, Once you know your deployment zones, both players roll a die. If either player rolls a 1, then both players must choose a single unit whose troop type is infantry or cavalry to be held in reserve. So unlike previous kind of meeting engagement-y situations where you had like weird random reserves or our system with the compulsory reserves, there is a not particularly high chance that um, you will have to put one unit in reserve.
yeah,
So, okay, cool. Also, it's got a special rule where you can stick characters in with the compulsory reserve unit if you want. So, like if you decide to put your Pegasus Knights in reserve for some reason, you can still put your Baron with the unit. He's not like forced to deploy on his own. Reserves arrive the same way that they always have. And then this one comes with the strategic locations 3 secondary objective baked into the mission, and then also says you could use domination or baggage train. So again, like when I was building out the mission pack that I wrote, or the event pack that I wrote, if any mission said must use a secondary, I just stuck with that one.
yeah.
This would actually be a very interesting one also to add baggage train to, just due to the shape of the battlefield. Really, baggage train is just great, and you can add it to anything.
Yes.
Uh, but I was sticking with a rule of only one secondary source of points per mission. So this one you've got 2 diagonal deployment zones with a series of 3 points along the center of the long center line that need to be fought over. basically putting kind of one close to each player's deployment zone and one in the middle of the table, which the way the angles shape out really does kind of work into two battle lines that are going to wind up smashing into each other. So like again, I get the reticence about point on board farming things, but I think in this mission in particular, the way that works out, like the desire to get those points and deny them to the enemy is going to make you maneuver in a way that visually makes sense with the mission that's happening. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So I have a few thoughts on this one. Like I like it. I generally like it. So I'll say this. So it's better. So the new reserve system, where you just roll in one unit of infantry or cavalry can land in reserve. It's much better from an event standpoint than the old. What's in the base rule book of you roll for each unit, which can lead to some real sort of feels bads. This one is not punishing at all. Like one unit from your core, essentially, in most cases, 1/6 of the time will be off the board when you start. So I have to play this six times before, theoretically speaking, pops up. So meh, I think this just becomes crooked open battle at that point, but whatever. I think having a character be able to go in with the reserving unit is actually a really cool adaptation that I think is like just makes it a lot less feels bad if you were intending to do that as part of deployment, being able to put them in there. Like I like that, and it makes sense to me sort of narratively or thematically that the character traveling with a unit would be stuck with the unit when they don't arrive at the battle at the right time, right? So that all makes sense. I will say, in terms of secondary objectives, I think this is the best one probably for Strategic Locations 3 because none of them sort of start in your deployment zone. They're all sort of in a no man's land that you're fighting over. So that makes sense to me. Or it makes more sense than in some other ones. So you'll have to actually be fighting for them. I like it. I think this one works. I don't have much. I don't have much else to add to it. I think it becomes a crooked open battle with three objectives in the middle in the no man's land. So I think it's a good mission, and I'm excited to try it out. Andrew.
Yeah, because of the weird deployment, I think this is maybe one of the few instances where objectives wouldn't be the worst because it still forces you out of your deployment zones. The way that they will be spread out on the table will force you to actually pick a flank as opposed to the original flank attack where it's just angled deployment. Like this actually will engineer a way engineer a scenario where you will be kind of flanking your army to get around and get to those objectives. So it is kind of like a cool aspect there. I think I don't know if that was intentional on the game designer's part or not, but I think this is like the one scenario where maybe those objectives aren't the worst.
Yeah. Yeah, and shout out as Ryan pointed out to having like a crooked deployment or whatever, a non-standard deployment that's easy to draw out on the table. You take your corner, you go to the middle of the short board edge on the other side, and you've got your deployment area. So yeah, I also like that. Cool. Okay, let's move on to close quarters. I guess I can take this one. So close quarters. Basically, the deployment area for this one is the same as the old. It's not flank attack. What was it called, Ryan?
This is like Mountain Pass
It's like
and
Mountain Pass
Breakpoint had a
flipped. Yeah,
baby.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like Mountain Pass but flipped over, and then the breakpoint one where you have the edges are sort of, you can't deploy in the 6-inch edges, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, there's 12 inches on separated into 6 inches on either side of your deployment zone that you can't use in this one. So this is bottleneck. So essentially it's the new mountain pass. So the battle's fought in a mountain pass. Basically, you take the old mountain pass, you flip it sideways, is what you're sort of looking at. So you can't leave the board through the short edges on either side. That counts as impassable terrain. And as with the old mountain pass, you can't have flying. You can only have flying or ethereal units exit through the short board edges in this case. So yeah, it's essentially flipped mountain pass basically. The scenario, the secondary objective on this one is 2 strategic locations in the middle, and you can also have domination in there as another objective. So you're fighting over 2 objectives that are going to be on the. Oh, sorry, 2 is one in each's deployment zone actually. So this is deployment zone camping essentially. I don't hate this mission. I mean, Mountain Pass, I did not hate previously. I like that it was on the one mission that was sort of on the long. You were fighting on the long direction of the board. I understand that for events, this is way easier to logistically manage. So I'm cool with the change. Again, objectives in the middle of the board. I'm not a huge fan of, but I think it's fine in this case. 2 objectives is also more manageable and less chaotic than 4. But yeah, I don't have a ton to say on this one. If you like Mountain Pass before, probably gonna like this one. Andrew.
Yeah, I would have preferred this with a different secondary.
Agreed.
Because now we are getting into the area where the objectives are going to dictate where you play the game on the table. You're already just straight across from your opponent along your long board edge, so you're just rushing the center. So I think that lets it down a bit. I do like the new, like taking secondaries out of this. I do like the new sort of deployment area for this one, especially with the bottleneck rules attached to it. Like I think without taking secondaries into account, like this is actually a cool new mission. But maybe as a TO, you would swap out strategic locations too for something else. Yeah, that's all I really have to say about that.
Awesome. Ryan, any points on this one?
Yeah, like I could actually see this one being played with baggage train instead of strategic locations 2.
Yeah.
Or strategic locations 3 would work. Just because it brings everyone to the middle of the table. But I actually don't have a problem with strat locations 2, but it's like right on the edge of your deployment zone. So it's really just, as I was saying when I was describing them earlier, like you're going to want to get ahead of your objective to protect yourself. And then you're going to be trying to like outmaneuver your opponent to get around them to go take theirs away.
Yeah.
I do think, like, yes, it dictates where you want to take the fight to, which arguably like is what an objective is supposed to do, but I don't have the same reservation Andrew does about how that's going to play out, because I think this will actually turn into a very positional matchup if you are trying to actually deny the opponent's objective instead of just YOLO, what if I kill them before they score 360 points?
Yeah. No, I guess. No, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. Okay, cool. Let's move on to the 5th one. Yeah, I could take this one. I really like this one. I think it's my favorite, potentially my favorite one out of all the missions that have been introduced in this pack. So a chance encounter, basically the way that it works is there's an 18-inch bubble or 9-inch, I guess, radius circle in the middle of the board where nothing can deploy. And then you have the table divided into 4 quarters. And so basically how deployment goes is you have players roll off. Basically, the guy who succeeds at the roll or wins the roll picks one of the 4 quarters, and then his opponent needs to deploy opposite to him in a diagonal fashion in the other corner of the board. There are no special rules attached to this one, and you must have a special feature in the middle of the 18-inch bubble in the center of the board there to go capture at the end of the game. So I really like this one. I think the deploying in quarters is a change from what we had before. I like that there's 4 different options for where you can deploy, so it's sort of dynamic, and and the choice is pretty impactful in terms of where you decide to go if you win that roll. You can also screw your opponent over by giving him a bad table quarter to get to the center of the board in. So I think that's all a lot of fun, and I like right in the middle of the board you got a special feature there, so that's great, and it's only 200 points. It's not terribly impactful. It's just the right amount, I think. So yeah, I really like this one. I think it's my favorite one of the new ones. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Um, I like it. It's gonna make for some very interesting decisions during deployment on how you want to place your force. Um, Especially if you're alternating deployment, there's going to be a whole new level of the sort of trying to, um, I guess, bait out your opponent's drops,
Yeah.
depending on what quarter you pick, where you place it, and then how they do it as well. So I think that alone is a really cool new way to approach a mission. Um, and especially because the focus due to the secondary is still going to be on the middle of the board. You're not necessarily just going to sort of rush your opponent in their deployment zone, even though you can get some very easy like turn 1 combats going on here. The focus is still you're trying to get to the center to, take over that the domination thing. So this is a very cool mission. I really want to actually play this one and see how it actually plays out like in an actual game. Because yeah, I love the deployment for this.
Awesome. Ryan.
This is Dust Up from Flames of War. Like literally. And it's great. I love it. I think I like the table quarters. I like the exclusion zone in the middle. For anyone wondering, the closest point between the 2 deployment zones is 12.7 inches. But like it's almost impossible to deploy non-skirmishers in a way that won't involve like a wheel or something to do that first turn charge.
Mhm.
So maybe a Bretonian lance, maybe. It's an interesting one. So this is the one mission where I changed the mandatory secondary in the pack, and it was because of the like Danny/Andrew like didn't have the things to be
Oh,
like,
sure.
let's smash a special feature into the center of 25 tables. Otherwise I'd have left it, but this is the one I switched the special feature for domination. So
Okay.
instead, like you're in a table quarter and then you're fighting for the rest of the table quarters. So I felt those things kind of went together.
Yes,
Um,
perfectly.
after our discussion, I'd even go so far as to do domination and special feature if we get
Yeah.
across the like logistical problem that causes. Um, but like I really like this mission because like you can go for the throat and fight the enemy. You can instead spread out and try and dominate the table. You can split the difference, do both. Like there's a lot of things you can do, and there's a lot of the table that's starting empty.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
so there's a lot of like room to maneuver, um, to play around with. So
Yeah. No, this is good. I like that in domination too. Like as you mentioned there, it starts empty and you're not controlling half of the scoring bits immediately from the get-go. It forces you to action too. So I think it's great. And I like the pairing of domination with that one. Um, cool. Andrew, you want to do encirclement?
Sure. So the last one is encirclement. The deployment zones are a little weird. So basically, you're kitty corner to each other. Your deployment zone is 12 inches from the center and 12 inches from one of the edges. So you're kind of shunted into one of the corners of
Mhm.
the table rectangle. and your opponent's deployment zone is the opposite corner. Still plenty of space to deploy, but you do have that little 1 foot gap on the end of your deployment zone. The scenario has no special rules and secondaries. It says you must include the strategic locations for secondary objective and may include baggage train or special feature secondary objective. I'm not a fan of the objectives for, because I'm not a fan of the objectives in general, but I do see where they're going with by having that as the mandatory one, because your deployment zones are a little off kilter. You'll have one on each of your deployment zones will have one, and then you're kind of fighting over the two in the middle. And because of the way your deployment zones are, you're kind of having to circle around your opponent potentially to, pick the favorable one outside of your deployment zone for you, while also trying to, push your opponent back off theirs. That being said, I think this would also be an interesting one for baggage train, although that fits for all of them. But just the way the deployment zones are set up on this, I think it'd be more interesting with maybe one of the other options. Even table quarters would kind of neat on this one.
Yeah. Ryan, any thoughts on this one?
I also agree that domination plus baggage train would be interesting on this one. But yeah, this is kind of a weird one where like I don't mind strategic locations for like as a suite of objectives for reasons I discussed earlier, where like you it's everything about 2 and 3 combined into one. So you're still fighting in the middle of the table. You're still defending your home base, kind of like you're doing different things, and you need to do all of those things with core. So like to get 1440 points, you need 4 different core units that are good enough to hold your own deployment zone, hold the middle of the table, and hold the enemy's deployment zone from the bottom of turn 1. Like I don't think that's a real thing that anyone has or will
No.
do.
Yeah.
But this thing, but like I don't actually like the offset deployment zones because they're not extreme enough. Like
Sure.
maybe it's the like I play cavalry army, but like having a 12-inch gap between my
Nothing.
deployments and the end of the table, like I don't care. Like
Yeah.
that
It would need
is
to be like a 24 or a 36.
yeah, like if they were actually just like half a table quarter almost,
Yeah.
and like that or something weird, I don't know. But as of right now, it just looks like what it looks like the same deployment from like the hill or even the regular one, and just a little bit fucky.
Shifted
Um,
to the side. Yeah.
yeah, like but again, like I'm half tempted as we have this discussion, or maybe in a future event, to swap this one for baggage train and domination, and then put special features 4 just on the boring upon
Battle.
fields of glory deployment. Um, I don't know, but
We'll see.
this
Yeah.
deployment doesn't do anything for me. It's just anyway. This mission seems the most kind of just gamey and themeless of all of them.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, so just a sort of meta comment beyond like this specific scenario there on all 6 of them. So we have 3 scenarios which must have strategic locations out of the 6, and then one King of the Hill, which is basically strategic locations 1 for all intents and purposes. So that's like, by my count, 3 or 4 out of 6 that are in the strategic locations sort of department. So that really skews at a broader level how you design your lists. Hopefully, otherwise you're probably in for a hard time. And it probably skews the meta and making some archetypes less competitive than others. But I'll stop there with that for now. Speaking only about encirclement. Yeah, this feels to me like open battle or upon fields of glory with strategic locations for like just the point Ryan was making in that, losing 12 inches off one side of my deployment zone has like literally no impact or very, very limited impact on how I deploy. Yeah, I was rarely jamming all my army or a significant portion of my army on the last 12 inches of the board anyways, so it's not going to have an enormous impact. Yeah, I mean, strategic locations, we've already talked about it a ton, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse anymore, but it feels like that's going to take over the game pretty significantly, pretty quickly. It'd be interesting with baggage trains, though, because I think the play would be to put them in the corner that's furthest away from your opponent, and then you'd have to cross a significant amount of the board to be able to get to them, so it would make actually getting them harder. But yeah, no, it's I don't have a ton on this one. Okay, so that covers all of the missions. Just before we close out on the other little items there at the end, quickly, what are your thoughts on the mission pack overall? Do you think these are going to be adopted broadly across the community, and are you guys considering them for your own events? We've already sort of heard that, but yeah, let's start with you, Ryan.
Yeah, so I like them, but at the same time, I'm less like no matter what we do, it's going to change. Like different things will be good, whether we have progressive scoring missions or non-progressive scoring missions or kill points or whatever. All you're doing is reshuffling the cards of what combination of units and tactics is better at stuff. Because the game is not like objectively balanced. It's kind of on a weird, rough seesaw. Um, so I like them. I like that there's variety, and I also like the kind of mix and matchiness, like we talked about. Yeah, okay, it says we must include this secondary, but you know what? Maybe after we try it a couple times, we just say fuck that and
Sure,
swap in
yeah,
a different one.
yeah.
Like these are
More baggage
they've given us
trains.
yeah, they've given us a ton of tools to edit and play around with and whatever. So it's a very nice sandbox for someone like me so that I don't need to, draw my own table and
Sure,
fucking
sure.
other shit.
Awesome. Andrew, any thoughts overall?
I think Ryan touched on it for me. Like, these are, I think for sure these are going to be adopted by events. Um, Even just based on the fact that it is from an official source. You know, a lot of people like the fact or stick to whatever GW makes, whether it's good or bad. So I think just based on that metric, like it will be adopted regardless. Um, but that being said, like Ryan said, echoing what was stated, this is just a great toolbox in general, even if you don't play them exactly as laid out here. So, we've already highlighted some of the secondaries that we don't agree with based on the mission. We can just change it. Who cares? It's our event. It's the way we want to play. So, if we don't feel that's the best way to play that scenario or that deployment, we can just change the secondary and all of a sudden we got a completely new mission. So I think that alone is amazing. And there's, I don't know the actual like exponential amount, but maybe hundreds of different scenarios we can make out of this just based on the tools that we're given here. So I think this is all positive. It's all good.
Yeah. No, so I think, like you guys, these are going to be really broadly adopted across most of the community and they'll sort of become the standard. I think you're right in that depending on how your TOs see the world, you'll see the secondaries. They may just ignore which secondaries are sort of mandated by the missions and go another way or not include them. Like, there's a lot of options here. I think at a broader level, because we're not going to have another place to really sort of talk about this, I will say that like I think we're setting ourselves up for a pretty big shift in the meta. When you consider, the comp that's limiting some of the big pieces that you could take, having a little bit of an impact on that side, and sort of what types of units you can take if you put the two different comps together. When you combine that with this mission pact, which radically changes how battles are fought in at least 4 out of 6 cases, for sure. And then when you smack a hopefully meaningful FAQ and errata on top of that. Not to mention like the 4 armies that have come out in quick succession, or sorry, the 3 armies that have come out in quick succession. I think we're on the verge of a pretty, like, I think I would say a watershed moment as far as the evolution of the game goes. So that's all exciting, and I'm pretty pumped to see sort of how the cookie crumbles and how we look at this in 6 months, and what the winners and losers are and what the lists look like at that point. So yeah, so that was a bit broader than the match play pack, but the mission pack, but that's fine. Doubles events. Have you guys want to? We'll go through this one quickly. There, anything you want to talk about or mention from the doubles events section, Andrew?
No, it's basically like the same as a singles event, but it's 2 players on the same team. The only thing I want to highlight is they talk about how you and your partner follow the alliance rules from page 280 in the Warhammer rulebook, and that most of the time you're going to be as trusted allies, but they're also still including uneasy or suspicious if you're doing that. So like if you take high elves and I don't know, chaos warriors, you're still going to be suspicious and don't get the benefits for that between the whole force. I think that's kind of dumb. Like if you're doing a doubles event, just fucking go all in. Everything's trusted allies regardless if it makes thematic sense or not.
Agreed. Yeah, for my part, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that's a miss. Like, especially when you look at the 3 scenarios, and I'll get back to the scenarios in 1 second. Like, it's and the fact that it's thought out for like a single day event, a 3-game event. You want this as kind of an introductory event, I think, for players. Like, you've got a friend who's never been to a tournament before. You want to bring him along. Like, the fact that then you make them distrusted or allies or armies that can't be taken together, I think is definitely a miss from the overall like construct of why you're doing a doubles event. I will say though that I really like the scenarios. I think they're wild, and I kind of want to try a doubles event just to try these wacky scenarios. Like, it would be a totally different mindset. Like, you're like, wild things will happen. Like the first one or the second one, I forget which one it is there, but like there's one where you're 2 halves. So like, let's say me and Ryan are on a team. Like, one of us will start in the middle of the board facing the opponent in the middle of the board, and then the other player shows up as reserve forces behind their opponent. So both teams get smashed in the rear by the other half of the enemy's team. Like, that's a wild scenario that I'd love to see played out on the board, see how that sort of shakes out. Not from any particularly like competitive sort of optimized gameplay perspective, but just as like a fun gameplay experience. So I think they really nailed it on the scenarios for these doubles. Ryan, what are your thoughts on doubles?
Not gonna lie, I only skimmed that part of the book because I just don't care about doubles. I've played in like
Sure.
8 doubles events in various games in my life and enjoyed one of them. So just
Okay.
it's not interesting to me. Like I
Sure.
just uh, yeah.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. This one is of more interest to you. Like, what's your overall thought, Ryan? Moving on to the alliance, or sort of it's called an alliance of warlords, but the team event guidance, like on how what GW's take on team events is. What do you like about it? Anything you think is a bit of a miss?
Yeah, no, I like it. Now, with that said, like when I wrote the hack for CHTT for Andrew, I basically copied 2/3 of the content of the Warhammer World pack.
Okay.
And if anyone hasn't noticed, almost everything in this book has been copy pasted out of a Warhammer World event pack sometime in the last 12 months.
Sure.
Fun fact, including both comps. So
Yeah.
So it works as a team event. Like the team format has existed for so long and been distilled in its own way. Um that I don't really have a lot. The only thing I really personally wouldn't go with out of this is for army lists. They just say you can only use each Grand Army or Army of Infamy once. But that means on like a 4-player team, you could have a team that has like 3 Bretonnian armies because they just use 3 different armies of infamy. I much preferred our like one faction. Like you could have an entire team under GW's construct that is nothing but undead up to
Yeah.
4 armies. Um, so yeah, I don't particularly like that. I think limiting it by macro faction as opposed to army list is a better choice. But like the rest of it's all just boilerplate stuff. Like it's there for people who've never seen or run teams before. Um, and it's all good and valid. Um, but yeah, like that's the only thing I really take issue with. I also liked our magic item restriction, but
Yeah.
what do you guys?
No. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. The things I was gonna say, so are basically the same as you there, Ryan, in terms of like this works well overall. Like I think they've just distilled like the core team event experience and put it down to paper, and like they haven't missed very much. I think like you that being able to double up on armies is definitely a miss. Like everybody's gonna groan when you show up to a 4-player team event and you're facing mortuary cults, regular tomb kings, royal host, and vampire counts. Like everybody's just going to say like, what the hell am I doing here type situation. But that aside, and the magical items issue, which I think is also a miss. I think it's a pretty good take on team events. I like that there's also some small quality of life improvements, let's call them, that have sort of snuck their way into here. For instance, you know how usually we refer to the like attackers, defenders, and then sort of like the like the leftover player or the unpicked player or what have you. Like GW rebranded those into Vanguard, Battle Line, and Rear Guard, which makes a lot of sense for me from just like the whole theme experience of this and the narrative behind why these teams are facing up. And I think it's a lot cleaner of a sense of description for it. So yeah, I think overall this is all good stuff. Andrew.
I don't know. I'm as much as I kind of talk shit about people who are precious to their own comp lists at the beginning of this episode, I kind of really like the work that Ryan did on ours for Can't Hammer Team Tournament.
Mhm.
Um, just in terms of making those hard choices in terms of lists and magic items. I thought that was a really interesting way to do it. That being said, like I think this is decent, other than sort of the army list restrictions. Although it
Yeah.
kind of gives insight on how GW views those armies of infamy. It's almost like they are treating them as their own separate faction apart from sort of the Grand Army faction, which
Yeah.
is it's kind of interesting, like insight into their mindset. But other than that, like this is all serviceable. It's kind of what you'd expect from a team's level, like system. So yeah, I think it's all
Perfect.
fairly positive.
Awesome. So I'm gonna go right back at you, Andrew, on this one. Like, so given all the guidance that they've put in this book for team events, do you think that it's going to help sort of boost their popularity in the broader community, or do you think like because it legitimizes them a little bit through GW, or do you think that like people who are going to run team events are going to keep running team events, or alternatively, do you see anything that they've put into this book being adopted across like existing team events?
I think in general, team events were like an inevitable thing that we're going to gain in popularity. You know, it was a big deal back when Warhammer Fantasy Battles was still in its heyday. You know, events like the WT or ETC, I guess, back then. But even now in other game systems, you know, 40K has a huge
Yeah.
fucking teams tournament scene. I know there's a few other games. I think AOS does as well. Um, so that I think that was inevitably gonna come to Old World regardless. It was just more of a slow adoption because it's essentially a new game. People are still trying to figure it out. The logistics behind running events like that is huge, and you kind of, at least starting out, you kind of have to, you know, hitch your wagon to another horse or whatever. I don't know how the fucking saying goes actually, but you know what I mean. Like you need to find another event that can even just hold you and a
Yeah.
proper event space and everything. So I think that was going to come regardless. I don't know how much this specific team's pack will be adopted just because it kind of leaves out certain key things. The main one being like, you know, no doubling up of factions. That is a core aspect of teams events. Um, it might be like this is a good skeleton to build on top of to make sort of those things. As well as like team events usually are where you see those like more in-depth comp hits to certain factions. Um, that's kind of the arena that those play in. So I think this is a good bones to work off of, but I think other events will either do their own thing or vastly like modify these rules here um, to suit their needs or suit their view of the game.
Yeah, awesome. That makes total sense to me. Ryan, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I don't think this is necessarily gonna like change like how prevalent team events were going to become or are kind of becoming or what have you.
Yeah.
I do think some of the language will get like I definitely am probably going to adopt the Vanguard Battle Line Rearguard language in the player pack for Andrew for next year. Um, like I liked that. That was a good thing. But the rest of it, again, it's like super boilerplate for anyone familiar with the format. So this goes back to that like if you've never run one before and you get this, okay, cool, you've got the same thing you could have found on Google with about 5 minutes worth of effort. Um, but you've got it from GW in a book full of missions. So, you know, that's helpful.
Mhm.
But at the same time, like, I'm happy to see teams expanding and growing, but I also am of the opinion that teams should be like a regional marquee thing that happens like annually.
Mhm.
Um, and not like for example, I think if another teams event tried to get off the ground at the scale of like Canhammer's event in say Toronto or Montreal, that like it would like House of Cards situation. Like
Yeah.
there's not enough old world players willing to play teams in a 300-kilometer radius of Ottawa um,
Yeah.
that that you'd be able to sustain multiple large teams events. Um, so that's my only thing is like I'm happy it's popular. I'm also happy that it's currently a once a year thing in the greater bubble that the three of us live in.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. No, I agree with all of that. I'm going to ask you guys another question that I was thinking of as we've discussed these missions is, you know, how the missions and the shift towards like a lot more objective scoring is a big sort of I don't know, like one of the core concepts behind this mission pack. We talked in the past about how team events like the one that we ran or that you guys ran at CHTT did not have as many skewy team lists as you thought there would be. Do you guys think that all these new secondaries, you know, so the 3 or 4 depending on how you sort of divide that, missions that have strategic locations as a scoring mechanic. Do you think that has an impact on the lists you bring specifically at teams? And do you think that's going to shift how people are building their teams, like some for objective scoring versus some army lists for like kill pointy style missions? Ryan, what do you think?
I have a very fun suggestion here that's actually based on kind of an older way Warhammer Fantasy teams used to run.
Okay.
Um, which is that, so remember how at CHTT we were having the person lacking the initiative in the pairing got to pick the table? So
Yep.
like
Oh, secondary.
so
Yeah.
no, even
Okay.
better. So historically it was you had to pick the mission.
Okay.
And so, for example, if we have teams of 6 and a suite of 6 missions,
Yeah.
you would have a situation where people got paired up. The the player without the initiative in the matchup picks what mission they're playing, but then the player with the initiative in the matchup picks what table they're going to play it on. But also,
Wow.
there's a finite number of missions, which means
Yeah.
like if one pairing is playing King of the Hill, no one else is playing that one.
Yeah.
So anyway, like that's where like you get real skewy
Yeah.
because each mission favors a different skew,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't with 6-player teams as an example, you or even 5-player teams, like you can't guarantee the right skew into enemy versus skew into mission that enemy is going to pick is going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm kind of leaning in that direction based on some conversations I had at CHGT about what I want to write for next year.
Yeah.
So
I think that's an amazing idea actually, and is going to make like so you had a sort of an x-axis in the past in terms of pairing, which was like army into army, but now you have a y-axis, which is like army into mission, and they're
yeah,
two radically different things. Yeah. Yeah. Andrew, any thoughts on this one in terms of how that impacts the lists?
I think it will for sure. Um, I think too, the thing that didn't have us see lots of skew lists was the fact that we only had 4-player teams.
Sure. Yeah.
Once you bump that up to 5 or even 8 players, I think you'll see there's more room there for going into those skew lists because it's kind of harder to make 8 all comers lists that are actually going to be viable on the table. But definitely, like once you add in secondaries and the missions provided in this book, it's definitely going to shift at least how some of these armies look and play on the table. And also, you will have people bringing armies that play into a specific role,
Yeah.
to either win these missions or to deny like certain other builds from competing properly. So
100%.
for sure, we'll have an effect on this design.
Okay, perfect. Okay, all right. Let's just before I close this out, secret objectives are left. I don't know, Andrew. Do you want to go through what secret objectives entails?
Yeah, they're just an additional way to score victory points. Should you and your opponent or your TO decide to use them. Basically, it's a list of 12 sort of mini objectives you do. You pick one in secret. And if you achieve sort of whatever's written in the objective, you score a variable amount of points at the end of your mission when tallying up VPs. Um, and
Yeah,
I don't think we'll read all of them, but like to pick one, for example, it's more esoteric shit that's available for your army to be able to do. So one I'm looking at right now is fire the artillery. To fulfill this objective, you must cause an enemy unit to fail a panic test and flee as a result of being shot by a unit whose unit type is War Machine. If you fulfill this objective, you win a bonus 100 victory points. So it's a bunch of stuff like that, all catered to different scenarios or different things happening in the game. And if you achieve that throughout your game, at the end you reveal like, hey, also I got my secondary. Here it is. Oh yeah, okay, cool. And then you just add on those victory points at the end.
Yeah. So just one quick correction there is if you were bringing these into a match play event, you would select 6 from the get go, and then you could only use them one of those 6 each game, only once in the event. But yeah, aside from that,
Right. Sorry.
you're bang on. Like, do you think these have a place in like match play events or not? They're more narratively focused. Like, would you think about including them?
I would. My only worry is the potential for abuse. I'm
Sure.
not saying everyone's dirty cheaters, but those people do exist out there, and it's hard as a TO to track which ones were used per game unless I start doing a ton of admin work.
Sure.
Um, so I like there's no way for me to know if someone, did the fire the artillery one already in one of their games and then tries to use it again in the
Tracking.
next
Yeah.
one.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's more suited for like a 1 day event, and maybe you force like it's super easy to just print these 2 pages off if you find a
Mhm.
scanner, take it to Staples or something, and print the physical objectives. And then you just kind of, okay, I scored it, and then you turn it into the TO at the end of the round after you tally up all your points or something. I can see
Yeah.
it working that way. It's just if we leave it all on player agency, I
Yeah. Yeah.
fear that it's an avenue for abuse. But I do think these are a positive thing to add to the game, especially if for the more have-not armies who might be able to score these maybe more easily, it
Mhm.
helps keep them sort of in the running. So I think there's room for it to be like used. It's just how do we implement it
Yep.
in a way that prevents abuse?
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. Before I go though, Ryan, you wanna give us your thoughts on the secret objectives?
Yeah, so I largely agree with what Andrew's already said. Like, the only way I see these being implemented as written would be at like one of our like 20-person 1 day events or something like that. Um, there's way too much fuckery to put this into like a big, like, well, like a very big event like Bloodbath or something like that. Um, I do think there's also an ancillary use for these. If you wanted to say take the missions in this book and replace the secondary objective with a less like be more kill points focused but still have like a secondary, just a less kind of extreme one, you could take one or two of these and instead of them being secret just make them the secondaries for a mission.
Yep.
Is just a thing. um so
I
like
think if you did that though, you'd need to do like 2 or 3 different ones that you can score per mission. That
Yeah.
way,
yeah,
it
Well,
doesn't
there's
just
12
favor
and yeah, you
one.
could yeah.
But there's
yeah,
enough variety here that you could just like mix and match like a whole bunch of them in like pairs and be like, okay, you can score these. It might, if you're not playing a dwarf gun line, you might only be able to get one of these. But I think
yeah.
there's room for
But
that for
that's kind of
sure.
exactly what they're getting at with is like they're not worth so many victory points that they're gonna be like game shattering if you can't accomplish them.
Sure.
But they do give both players like something to try to do. I think if you wanted to do kind of like a peel back a little bit from where this book has gone and do more core rulebook style missions, but with a bit of a secondary flavor,
Yep.
you could use these in pairs, as you said, as substitutes for the other secondaries, plus
Agreed.
baggage train. Um,
Plus always the baggage train.
always baggage train.
Yeah.
Um, other than that, like they're neat. Like some of them, like Wizard's Bane, is like insanity. Like there's no way to like guarantee 3 faded dispels in a 6-round game. Like, it is what it is.
That's calming of the winds. You're mixing two
Or
of them up.
whatever. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I think these are great. I really like these. I think they're fun secondary or secret objectives. Like they're all thematic. To me they build on what the overall game design is like. I'm not going to say I prefer these to secondary objectives because baggage train exists, as we've discussed. But I think these are great. They're a lot of fun. And you'd have to, I think it would be a very viable option to say, we're not doing secondaries in this event. We're using the missions in the book. You get your 12 cards and you've got to use, 2 every game. You turn them into the TO or what have you. Like I haven't, and that's why it's great to have you guys on here. I hadn't thought of like the TOing aspect to this and ensuring that people are, remain honest with this secret objective process. But I think if you can work your way around this, I think these are perfectly viable. And having something like, hey, in this open upon the field of glory, if you're, your generals challenge and you get like extra points, like it's super. To me, it all makes a lot of sense, and it's all thematic and it's all cool. So I'm all for it, and I think these are super usable if you're playing at home with your buddy, just a one-off game. Like, hey, we each have a pair or a single secret objective, and off you go. And then at the end of the game, like it's a cool thing to brag about or commiserate about, what have you. So yeah, I like them. I think they're great. Okay, so that takes us through the whole book. So thanks for sticking with us on this one. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Andrew, anything you want to shout out on the way out?
Oh, tickets are still on sale for CCB. So check it out.
Perfect. You can see the 3 of us there. Yeah. Awesome. Ryan, anything you want to shout out?
No, just come to Capital City Bloodbath.
Perfect. Okay, nothing on my end. Have a good one, listeners, and we'll see you next time, hopefully for the FAQ and errata review.